In this world, the strong rule and the weak are basically just appetizers. I was the biggest loser of them all, a servant with zero talent. But then the Demon King's army attacked my sect out of nowhere. My own master used me as a human shield, which really spoiled the father-son vibe we had going. I felt the cold blade of a demon general pierce my heart. As I died, a voice in my head asked if I wanted to change my fate. I said yes so fast I probably gave the god of death whiplash in a lawsuit. I woke up in my old, tiny room, feeling like I'd just been hit by a freight train. I realized I had traveled back 10 years into the past. A blue screen appeared in front of me like a Windows update you can't skip. It was a leveling system that only I could see. I'd regressed to the day of the entrance exam, right to the start of my tragic backstory. This time, I wasn't going to be anyone's stepping stone. I got out of bed and felt a strange power flowing through my veins. Suddenly, the door was kicked open by the sect's biggest bully. It was Zhao Wei, a guy whose ego was significantly larger than his brain. He looked at me with a sneer so punchable it should be illegal in all 5 continents. He told me to hand over my spirit stones or he'd break my legs. In my past life, I would have given them up without a fight. But this time, I just looked at him and smiled. Zhao Wei froze, clearly not expecting me to treat him like a total joke. What are you laughing at? Did your brain finally short-circuit from fear? He barked. I slowly stood up and brushed the dust off my clothes with maximum dramatic flair. Zhao Wei, you're still the same pathetic NPC, only capable of bullying the weak. His face turned redder than a tomato in a pressure cooker, and his knuckles were popping like bubble wrap. You're asking for it. Today I'm going to teach you who the real boss is. He swung a massive punch right at my face, putting all his 0 IQ energy into it. To me, his movements were so slow it felt like I was watching a YouTube video on 0.25x speed with a bad connection. Suddenly, the system notification pinged in my brain like a new follower alert. Hostility detected. Combat mode initiated. Time to kick some trash. I tilted my head an inch and let his fist whistle harmlessly past my ear. His momentum sent him flying forward, looking like a clumsy penguin trying to ice skate for the first time. No way. How did a total loser like you dodge my legendary strike? I didn't waste any breath on dialogue and just planted my boot firmly into his backside. Zhao Wei flew across the room like a rag doll and slammed into the wall with a satisfying thud. Ding. Defeated a low-level trash talker. You earned 10 EXP. 10 EXP? At this rate, I'll have to beat up half the sect just to afford a decent haircut. His little group of lackeys stood by the door, looking absolutely shell-shocked. These guys usually acted like they owned the place, but now they were frozen in fear. I gave them a look that could freeze hell over and told them to get lost before I lost my patience. They scrambled away in a panic, tripping over each other to get out of the room. I turned my attention back to the blue system interface floating in my vision. Daily quest, humiliate 3 more bullies. Reward, basic cultivation pill. This system is basically turning my life into a toxic Twitter thread, and honestly, I'm here for the drama. I snatched Zhao Wei's storage bag, which felt lighter than my bank account after a Steam Summer sale. Inside were a few pathetic spirit stones and a manual for basic fist techniques. I tossed the manual aside because I didn't have time for low-level garbage. Suddenly, a massive bell chimed, signaling the start of the morning assembly. Being late in this sect is usually a one-way ticket to a very painful execution. I sprinted toward the main hall while the other disciples watched me in stunned silence. Elder Mo stood at the front, sporting a beard longer than the list of my failed New Year's resolutions. He looked down at the crowd with an expression of pure, unadulterated coldness. Who is responsible for the disturbance in the outer dorms? His voice thundered. The silence in the room was absolute, and I could feel everyone's eyes burning into my back. Of course, one of Zhao Wei's goons pointed a shaking finger directly at me. It was him, Elder. He used some forbidden technique to beat up Brother Zhao. The crowd erupted in whispers as every eye in the room locked onto me. Elder Mo's gaze landed on me, and I felt a crushing weight settle over my entire body. Warning, high-level pressure detected. System suggestion, try not to die. Thanks for the advice, system. That's about as helpful as a waterproof sponge. Elder Mo let out a cold snort, and the spiritual pressure instantly cranked up several notches. I grit my teeth, feeling my bones creak like a haunted house door in a low-budget horror movie. What is your name? Why are you brawling inside the sect grounds? He demanded coldly. I took a deep breath, trying my best not to look like a total disaster in front of everyone. Elder, Zhao Wei threw the first punch. I was just practicing some very aggressive self-defense. The crowd erupted in whispers, probably wondering if I had a secret death wish. In this world, talking back to an elder is basically speedrunning your own funeral. Elder Mo's gaze sharpened, looking like he wanted to dissect me with his eyes right there. Self-defense. A level 3 loser like you beat a level 5 disciple like Zhao Wei. I cursed internally because this old man is as obsessed with power levels as a toxic Dragon Ball Z fan. System notification, hostility detected. Activating Oscar-winning actor mode. I immediately switched to a victimized expression, making my eyes look slightly red and watery. Elder, have mercy. Zhao Wei stole my stones and insulted my parents. I just couldn't take it. Honestly, my acting is so top tier, I should be winning a Golden Globe right now. Elder Mo frowned, clearly weighing whether I was telling the truth or just a professional liar. Zhao Wei's lackey panicked and screamed, "He's lying. He's making the whole thing up." I ignored that little NPC and kept my gaze locked onto the elder. If you don't believe me, just check Zhao Wei's track record of being a total menace. The room fell into a silence, so heavy it felt like my lungs were being sat on by a sumo wrestler. Elder Mo stayed silent for a long moment before finally opening his mouth to speak. Elder Mo declared that we had both brought shame to the outer sect. I stood there, trying to maintain my best innocent victim expression. He turned his icy gaze toward Zhao Wei, who was still groaning on the floor. He told Zhao Wei that losing was more embarrassing than my search history from 2005. Zhao Wei tried to protest, but he only managed to cough up more dirt. Elder Mo then looked back at me, his eyes narrowing into suspicious little slits. He asked me how a trash like me suddenly developed the strength to beat a genius. I felt a cold sweat run down my back as he stepped into my personal space. He grabbed my wrist with a grip that felt like a mandatory 50 gigabytes system update. He was probing my meridians, searching for any signs of forbidden cultivation. System notification, stealth mode activated, hiding cheat engine signatures. I breathed a silent sigh of relief as the system did its job. He concluded that my foundation was stable, but my mouth was far too loud. We were sentenced to clean stables that smell worse than a Discord mods room. My heart sank faster than a lead wade in the ocean. I wondered if cleaning monster poop was part of the god-tier package. Zhao Wei looked even more horrified, probably because he's never held a broom in his life. The system immediately gave me a Janitor of Destiny quest for 50 XP. I bowed deeply, pretending to be grateful for the punishment. I promised the elder that those stables would be absolutely spotless. Elder Mo finally turned and walked away, leaving us to our shitty punishment. Zhao Wei picked himself up, glaring at me with pure, unrefined hatred. He spat on the ground and swore he'd have my head on a platter. I just ignored him like a mid-roll YouTube ad I couldn't wait to skip. I started walking toward the stables, feeling the weight of my new career. The stench of the stables was overwhelming and hit me like a physical wall. I saw the spirit beasts, and they looked like they hadn't bathed since the Ming Dynasty. These massive monsters were huffing and puffing like they had some serious anger issues. Suddenly, my system screen flickered to life right in front of my face. The objective was clear: clean every single stall or lose my god-tier status. I grabbed a rusty shovel that looked older than the elder himself. Shoveling monster manure is definitely not the epic adventure I was promised in this isekai. I dug in, trying my best not to pass out from the toxic fumes. Zhao Wei finally dragged himself over, looking like he was walking to his own execution. He stood there with his arms crossed, refusing to touch a single dirty broom. A spirit horse suddenly lashed out and kicked Zhao Wei right in the chest. I watched him fly backward and land face first in a pile of manure. System notification: you have gained 5 XP for witnessing a combat event. Hold on, my XP bar actually moved just from cleaning this literal dump? If shoveling poop makes me a god, then call me the king of the septic tank. Zhao Wei scrambled out of the pile, looking like a total chocolate-covered disaster. He started screaming about his father and how I'd pay for this massive L. I just leaned on my shovel, enjoying the view of his ruined silk robes. Honestly, his face was redder than a streamer who just got caught using wall hacks. A notification popped up: new skill unlocked, manure mastery. Are you kidding me? This system is definitely trolling me at this point. I ignored the notification and went back to work, wanting to finish this nightmare. Every scoop of dung felt like I was leveling up my patience stat to the max. Suddenly, the stable doors creaked open, letting in a sliver of actual light. A girl walked in, wearing the uniform of an intersect disciple. She was so beautiful that the background music probably shifted to a high-budget violin solo. She looked at Zhao Wei, then at me, and wrinkled her nose in disgust. Who is responsible for the spirit stallion's feeding schedule? She asked. Zhao Wei immediately pointed at me, his fingers shaking with pure malice. I hadn't even seen a feeding schedule, let alone touched the horse's food. This guy snitched faster than a kid in the principal's office, trying to save his own skin. The girl stepped closer, her aura making the air feel heavy and cold. I realized she was at least a level 5 cultivator, way out of my league. My survival instincts were screaming louder than a Karen at a closed Starbucks. I took a deep breath and prepared to lie through my teeth to save my life. I'm just the janitor here. The feeding schedule is way above my pay grade. Don't believe him, senior sister. He's the one who let the horse starve. Zhao Wei shrieked. Her eyes narrowed, and I could practically feel the temperature in the room drop. The spirit stallion hasn't eaten in 3 days and is currently throwing a massive tantrum. She gestured toward the stable where a horse was trying to kick its way to freedom. If that beast gets out, we're all going to be flatter than a pancake in a Looney Tunes cartoon. I glanced at the horse and saw it was radiating a terrifying, pulsating purple aura. A window popped up. New quest: tame the stallion or prepare for your funeral. This system is more toxic than a League of Legends lobby after a failed mid-lane gank. I took a step toward the stable, trying to hide the fact that my knees were shaking. I've got this, I lied, my voice hitting a pitch only dogs could hear. Zhao Wei started cackling, clearly enjoying the prospect of my imminent and messy demise. The girl didn't look convinced, her hand tightening on her sword like she was ready to use it. If you mess this up, you'll be kicked out of the sect before you can say sorry. The stakes here are higher than the price of a high-end graphics card during a crypto boom. I walked toward the stall, the wood groaning under the force of the horse's kicks. The horse let out a scream that definitely didn't sound like it came from a herbivore. I reached into my inventory and pulled out a glowing spirit carrot I'd found earlier. I really hope this carrot has more plot armor than the red shirt extras in a Star Trek episode. I tossed the carrot into the stall and hoped it would stop the beast from murdering me. The spirit stallion froze mid-kick, its nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of the carrot. It slowly turned its head, looking at the glowing vegetable like it was the last slice of pizza at a party. The purple aura around the beast began to flicker and fade into a soft, calming blue. It took a tentative bite, and for a second, I thought it was going to explode. Instead, it let out a satisfied whinny and started nuzzling my hand for more. System, quest, tame the stallion completed. Reward, 50 XP and a horse whisperer title. Great, a title, because that's definitely going to help me pay my student loans in this fantasy world. Zhao Wei's jaw hit the floor as he stared at the now docile beast. Impossible, that's a rank 3 spirit beast. You probably cheated, he screamed. I just shrugged, trying to look like I did this every single day. Senior sister stepped forward, her expression shifting from, I'm going to kill you to wait, who are you? I've never seen anyone calm a stallion of the void with a mere carrot, she whispered. Little does she know, this carrot has more plot armor than a shonen protagonist in the final episode. She sheathed her sword, and the killing intent in the air vanished instantly. What is your name, disciple? You clearly have a talent for beast taming. I told her my name, trying to sound like a mysterious protagonist instead of a guy who sweeps floors. Zhao Wei wasn't having it, and tried to snatch the remaining carrot pieces from the ground. The horse, apparently a fan of my cooking, delivered a back kick straight to his chest. He hit the wall harder than my motivation to work out on a Monday morning. I couldn't help but smirk. Seeing the bully get wrecked is the only reason I haven't quit this job yet. Senior sister stared at the unconscious Zhao Wei, then back at me like I was some kind of alien. A mere outer disciple, with such affinity, she muttered, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. I stood my ground, keeping my expression as neutral as possible to hide my internal panic. It's just a gift, I said, trying to maintain my cool, mysterious vibe for the imaginary cameras. Honestly, I was just glad the horse didn't decide to turn me into a human pancake instead. She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't draw her sword again, which I took as a win. The sect leader needs to hear about this. A stallion of the void hasn't been tamed in decades. Great, more attention, because being the trash disciple wasn't already making my life a living hell. Zhao Wei groaned on the floor, probably seeing more stars than a NASA telescope right now. Shut up, Zhao, she snapped, not even glancing at his pathetic, twitching form. She signaled for me to follow her, her long robes fluttering as she walked away. As we walked through the sect grounds, every other disciple stopped and stared at us. I could practically hear the gossip spreading faster than a leaked celebrity sex tape in the cafeteria. Is that the floor sweeper? Why is he walking with the ice beauty? They whispered. I ignored the whispers, keeping my eyes fixed on the path ahead to avoid any awkward eye contact. The stallion followed right behind me, its heavy hooves echoing against the stone floor. We reached the Great Hall, a massive structure that radiated power and ancient history. The guards at the door crossed their spears, looking like they were ready to NPC guard the hell out of me. He is with me, Senior Sister said, her voice cold enough to give the guards instant frostbite. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, wondering if I was about to be promoted or executed. The Great Hall was so ridiculously opulent it made a billionaire's mansion look like a cardboard box. Massive pillars carved with golden dragons lined the room, probably to remind everyone how poor they are. At the far end sat the sect leader, looking like he was waiting for his turn to be the final boss. His aura was so heavy I felt like I was trying to walk underwater while wearing lead boots. Senior Sister bowed with perfect grace, while I just tried not to faceplant on the polished marble. Sect leader, this is the outer disciple who tamed the stallion of the void, she reported. The sect leader opened his eyes, and I swear he was looking straight into my soul and my search history. His gaze moved to the horse, which was currently trying to eat a tapestry that probably cost a fortune. An outer disciple? Taming a beast that even the elders fear, he asked, his voice echoing through the hall. I stood there like a deer in headlights, wondering if this was the part where I get a power-up or a funeral. He stood up and slowly descended the stairs, each step sounding like a countdown to my inevitable demise. He stopped right in front of me, radiating enough main character energy to make me feel like a background NPC. Tell me, kid, how did a nobody like you tame a creature of the void? He demanded. I needed a cool answer, because I just patted its head definitely wasn't going to cut it here. It was a connection of spirits, sect leader, I said, trying to sound like a profound cultivation master. The horse let out a massive, wet sneeze right onto the sect leader's expensive-looking robes. The entire room went silent, and I felt my life flash before my eyes in low-definition 480p. Senior Sister looked like she was ready to bury me herself to save the sect the trouble. But then, the sect leader started laughing, a sound so loud it probably shattered windows in the next town over. I like you, kid. You've got more balls than a ball pit at a McDonald's play place, he roared. I let out a breath I'd been holding, finally feeling my soul return to my body. The sect leader wiped the horse snot off his face with a calm, practiced motion. Since you've tamed this beast, I'm promoting you to an inner disciple right now, he declared. My rank jumped up so fast I half expected to see a level-up animation pop up in midair. Senior sister stared at me in complete disbelief, her face turning a bright shade of red. But sect leader, he's a nobody who's only been here for a month, she protested. The sect leader ignored her and tossed a jade token at me that shimmered with intense spiritual light. I caught it, and a surge of power rushed through my body like a tidal wave. This token gives you full access to the Forbidden Library, he added, looking way too mysterious. The Forbidden Library? That's basically the VIP lounge for people with enough plot armor to survive the finale. I thanked him, bowing deeply to show my respect for his unexpected generosity. As we left the hall, senior sister glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. Don't get cocky, rookie, she hissed, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. Just because the sect leader is crazy doesn't mean you've actually earned your place here. She was glaring at me with enough Sundara energy to power a small city for a week. We headed toward the inner sect dorms, which were way fancier than my previous dirt floor shack. The air here was so thick with spiritual energy, I felt like I was huffing pure mountain oxygen. But just as I was starting to relax, a group of arrogant-looking disciples blocked our path. The leader had long, flowing hair and carried himself with an air of immense superiority. He looked like he was auditioning for the role of arrogant young master number 4 in a low-budget movie. He looked at me like I was a piece of gum stuck to the bottom of his expensive designer boots. So you're the lucky trash who tamed the spirit horse? He sneered, looking incredibly offended. I just stood there, wondering how much hairspray it took to keep his mane that perfect. Seriously, his hair has more structural integrity than my last relationship. Senior sister stepped forward, her voice dripping with more annoyance than a customer service representative. Move aside, Lu Feng. He's under the sect leader's direct orders, she snapped. Lu Feng laughed, a sound so obnoxious it probably lowered the property value of every dorm in a 5-mile radius. The sect leader is getting old and senile if he thinks this peasant belongs here, he mocked. He stepped closer, and I could smell that overpriced cologne radiating off him in waves. In the inner sect, we don't care about tokens, we care about strength, he declared. Great, another might makes right speech. I swear these villains all graduate from the same school of generic antagonist monologues. He raised his hand, and a ball of blue energy started crackling between his fingers. My danger senses started ringing louder than a Discord notification at 3 in the morning. Hand over the jade token, and maybe I'll let you keep your legs, he threatened. I looked at the token in my hand, then back at his extremely punchable face. Sorry, I don't take fashion advice from guys who wear more eyeliner than my ex. The crowd gasped, shocked that a nobody like me would actually talk back to the local bully. Lu Feng's face turned a shade of purple that definitely wasn't in his seasonal color palette. He lunged at me, his palm glowing with enough power to level a small suburban house. I barely had time to react, my body moving on pure, unadulterated survival instinct. I dodged his strike by an inch, feeling the heat of the energy singe my bangs. You think you're fast? He hissed, his ego clearly bruised by missing a target with zero cultivation. He swung again, his hand moving faster than a middle-aged mom grabbing the last discounted air fryer on Black Friday. I stumbled back, my heart pounding against my ribs as the air around us began to crackle. Suddenly, a weird warmth spread from the jade token in my pocket, surging through my veins. My vision blurred, and for a split second, I could see the flow of his energy like a glowing neon sign. I didn't think, I just pivoted on my heel and stuck out my foot. It was a simple, desperate maneuver, but it was perfectly timed to catch him off balance. He tripped over my boot and went flying, his divine azure strike, hitting a pillar instead of me. Talk about a major skill issue for a supposed genius. The pillar shattered into a million pieces, sending a cloud of dust and debris raining down on the spectators. Lu Feng face-planted into the dirt, leaving the entire courtyard in a state of stunned, absolute silence. The spectators watched in disbelief, unable to process that a newcomer had just humiliated the top disciple. Lu Feng scrambled up, his face covered in mud and his eyes burning with pure, unadulterated rage. I'll kill you, he screamed, right as a massive, soul-crushing pressure descended from the heavens. An elderly man with a beard long enough to be a safety hazard floated down from the clouds, looking like a very disappointed, very magical Q-tip. Enough, the elder barked, his voice vibrating through the very ground beneath my feet. He looked at Lu Feng with pure disappointment, then turned his gaze toward me, narrowing his eyes. Behind him, the gates to the inner sect loomed, their golden surface shimmering with ancient, powerful enchantments. The sect leader is waiting for the boy, the elder announced, waving his sleeve to clear the tension. Senior sister grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the gates, officially ending my 5-minute tutorial phase of not dying. As we walked through, I realized my life was about to get a whole lot more complicated, and probably more violent. The inner sect was basically a 5-star resort for people who can fly on swords, and I was definitely the guy who forgot his luggage. Senior sister led me down a path lined with trees that shimmered with an expensive-looking glow. I tried to look cool, but I was mostly just trying not to trip over my own feet. We reached a massive hall that looked like it was built by a giant with an obsession for gold leaf and zero concept of a budget. The doors creaked open, revealing a room so big it probably had its own zip code. At the far end sat the sect leader, looking like he was posing for a most mysterious immortal calendar, probably waiting for his lighting guy to fix the glow. His presence was so heavy, it felt like the air itself was trying to bench press me. "So, this is the brat who caused a scene at the gate," he said, his voice echoing like a subwoofer. I stood there, wondering if I should bow or just run for my life while I still had legs. Senior sister pushed me forward, her grip on my shoulder tight enough to leave a permanent mark. The sect leader leaned forward, his eyes glowing with a light that definitely wasn't natural. He stared at me for a long time, his gaze piercing through my very soul. "You have no cultivation, yet you defeated Lu Feng," he noted, sounding more bored than impressed. I wanted to tell him it was 90% luck, but I wisely kept my mouth shut. He waved a hand, and a floating scroll appeared out of thin air like a glitch in the Matrix, because apparently, physics is just a suggestion here. "Sign this, and you're officially part of the sect's most dangerous department," he declared. I looked at the scroll, which was covered in ancient, shimmering symbols. Senior sister whispered that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, though she looked worried. I took the brush, my hand shaking with every movement as I reached for the paper. As soon as my name hit the paper, the room exploded in a flash of blinding light. The light was so bright I thought I was getting flashbanged by a Call of Duty sweat in a dark room. When my vision finally cleared, I wasn't in that overpriced gold leaf hallway anymore. I was standing in a desolate valley filled with broken weapons and a very bad vibe. "Welcome to the sword graveyard," a voice croaked, sounding like it had been gargling gravel. A withered, old man appeared, looking like he'd been part of the landscape for a century. He looked like he hadn't seen a shower since the last dynasty and smelled like a wet dog in a microwave. "I'm the caretaker here, and you're the new volunteer who's supposed to clean this mess." I looked at the contract in my hand, which was now glowing with an ominous green light. My system interface popped up, flashing a high fatality zone warning in bright red letters. "Great," I muttered. I went from a human shield to a glorified janitor for dead swords. The old man tossed me a rusty shovel that looked like it would break if I sneezed on it. "Start digging, kid. These swords have a lot of resentment, and they don't like company." I realized then that the most dangerous department was just a fancy name for the sect's trash heap. Talk about a marketing scam. Senior sister was gone, probably back at the main hall laughing about my new promotion. I took a swing with the shovel, and a system notification suddenly pinged in my ear. "New quest. Purify 100 cursed blades to unlock the Master of Scrap's hidden title." The XP rewards were actually insane, which is the only reason I didn't immediately walk out. I looked at the first sword I had to bury. It was covered in a thick, black aura. "Alright, let's see if my level 1 stats can handle a haunted kitchen knife," I sighed. I reached for the blade, because in this world, honor doesn't pay for my level-ups or my premium battle pass. The moment I touched the hilt, a wave of freezing energy shot straight up my arm. It felt like I'd just reached into a freezer full of angry ghosts and forgotten my gloves. The black aura started crawling up my skin like a budget CGI effect from a 90s horror movie. Warning, corrosive resentment detected. HP is dropping faster than a crypto bro's portfolio. I gritted my teeth and tried to channel my inner strength to push back the darkness. "Is that all you've got?" I shouted, trying to look way cooler than I actually felt. The sword let out a screeching sound that made my ears feel like they were bleeding. Suddenly, the rusty shovel in my other hand started to glow with a faint blue light. System, trash collector's luck, activated. 50% resistance to garbage tier curses. I slammed the shovel into the ground, and the shockwave sent the black mist flying. The sword finally calmed down, looking less like a cursed relic and more like a piece of scrap metal. Purification successful. You gained 500 XP and a slightly used bandage. A bandage? Seriously? This game's loot table is more disappointing than a loot box in a mobile game. The old man watched me from the shadows, his eyes squinting in genuine confusion. "Not bad, kid. Most newbies pass out before they even touch the rust." I wiped the sweat off my forehead and looked at the thousands of other swords waiting for me. If I have to do this for every single blade, I'll be 100 years old before I reach level 10. But then I noticed a massive, glowing sword stuck in a boulder at the center of the valley. It looked like the kind of legendary weapon that only the main character is supposed to find. I marched toward it, because ignoring obvious death flags is the only way to get a decent power-up. I reached out my hand, ready to claim the legendary sword for myself. The air around the boulder began to hum with a terrifying amount of power. System warning, you are attempting to interact with an SSS rank item. SSS rank? Finally, some good loot that isn't a dirty bandage, I muttered. A massive guardian spirit suddenly erupted from the shadow of the blade. It was a giant knight in silver armor, looking like a Dark Souls boss who definitely didn't get the memo about my low level. "Who dares disturb the resting place of the Dragon Slayer?" the spirit roared. I looked at my rusty shovel, and then back at the 10-foot-tall knight. This felt exactly like one of those scripted boss fights you're supposed to lose. The knight swung a massive spectral blade that looked heavy enough to crush a mountain. I barely managed to roll away, feeling the wind pressure nearly rip my skin off. System, quest updated, survive the Guardian's onslaught for 3 minutes. 3 minutes? That's longer than those unskippable double ads that show up right at the climax of a video. I started sprinting around the boulder like a headless chicken in a panic. Every time the knight swung, the ground exploded into a shower of dirt and stone. Hey, can't we just talk about this over some tea? I yelled while panting. The Guardian clearly wasn't a fan of small talk and raised his sword again. I tripped over a pebble, proving that gravity is the most consistent villain in every single isekai ever made. Just as the blade was about to turn me into a pancake, my system pinged. New skill unlocked. Plot armor dash. Because the writers realized I was about to die in Chapter 2. I activated the skill, and my body moved faster than a keyboard warrior typing first on a viral video. The spectral blade slammed into the ground, missing me by a hair's breadth. I was suddenly 10 feet away, my legs vibrating with a strange, jittery energy. Missed me. You're slower than a 90s dial-up connection, I shouted, immediately regretting my big mouth. System, plot armor dash, duration remaining, 15 seconds. The knight let out a metallic screech that sounded like a fork scraping a ceramic plate. He raised his hand, and dozens of smaller spectral swords materialized in the air. He raised his sword again, clearly entering a second phase of the fight. The swords started raining down like a localized monsoon of sharp, glowing death. I zipped through the gaps, my new skill doing all the heavy lifting for my survival. I noticed a faint, pulsing blue light at the joint of the knight's silver armor. That's a classic video game weak point if I've ever seen one. Basically a stab here sign. I gripped my rusty shovel, praying it wouldn't shatter on impact. I lunged forward, aiming straight for the glowing gap in his shoulder plate. The knight tried to swat me away like a persistent mosquito at a summer barbecue. I ducked under his massive arm, feeling the freezing chill of his spectral aura. System, 10 seconds remaining until the quest objective is complete. The Guardian realized he was out of time and began to glow with a blinding light. He unleashed a massive shockwave that sent me tumbling backward across the dirt. I hit the ground hard, but the timer finally hit 0 and the knight froze mid-swing. The spectral knight shattered into a million glowing shards, finally giving my ears a break from that metallic screeching. System, quest survive the Guardian's trial, has been successfully completed. A warm, golden light enveloped my body as the sweet, sweet sound of a level-up notification rang out. System, you have reached level 15. All base attributes have been increased by 2 points. I looked at the loot drop and honestly, it was so disappointing I felt like I'd just spent 2 hours watching a movie with a terrible ending. Among the pile of spectral dust, a single obsidian key pulsed with a rhythmic, dark energy. I picked it up, and the sheer coldness of the metal made my fingers feel like they were turning into popsicles. The dungeon walls started to groan and shift, revealing a hidden mechanism behind the stone altar. A hidden passage creaked open behind the knight's pedestal, revealing a path leading further down into the abyss. A voice boomed from the shadows, sounding exactly like every final boss who thinks their monologue is actually interesting. You have passed the first gate, mortal, but the true nightmare begins now. The voice echoed through the chamber. I took a deep breath and prepared myself for whatever cliché horror was waiting for me in the next room. System warning. You are now entering the abyssal floor. Death is permanent and respawning is disabled. I felt a cold sweat break out, knowing my life was officially on the line in this high-stakes dungeon. I tightened my grip on my shovel, knowing that one wrong move would send me straight back to the afterlife. The stairs were so narrow and slick that I looked like a baby giraffe trying to walk on a frozen lake. I activated my low-light perception skill, and the darkness transformed into a grainy, neon green landscape. At the end of the corridor, a massive iron door stood between me and the next zone of the tower. 2 gargoyles perched above the door suddenly cracked their stone skins, their eyes glowing a menacing crimson. And just when things were getting good, the screen fades to black. Classic cliffhanger move, guys. The gargoyles lunged at me, their stone wings cutting through the air like jagged knives. I barely rolled out of the way, feeling the cold wind of their claws whistle past my ears. One of them landed with a heavy thud, looking like a budget version of Batman who really let himself go. I swung my shovel with everything I had, aiming straight for its rocky kneecaps. Sparks flew as metal met stone, and my arms vibrated like a malfunctioning massage chair. System, skill heavy strike, has been activated. The gargoyle's leg shattered, sending it tumbling to the ground in a heap of rubble. The other one screeched, so loud I'm pretty sure my eardrums just filed for a restraining order. It dove from the ceiling, its eyes locked onto my throat with predatory precision. I sidestepped the attack and delivered a crushing blow to its exposed back. System, you have dealt a critical hit. 250% damage applied. The creature disintegrated into a cloud of gray dust, finally shutting up for good. I stood there panting, wondering why every dungeon needs a pair of overgrown lawn ornaments as security. Of course, the iron door didn't just open. It waited for a dramatic 3-second delay because pacing is everything. The heavy gates groaned open, revealing a room filled with a thick, suffocating purple mist. System warning, you have entered a toxic zone. Health will deplete by 1% every 10 seconds. I quickly pulled my cloak over my face, hoping it worked better than a cheap paper mask. Deep in the mist, I could see the faint glow of a treasure chest sitting on a pedestal. I opened it and found a rusty ring of agility. Thanks, game. This is definitely worth risking my life for. But as I touched the ring, the floor beneath me suddenly vanished, and here we go again. I plummeted into the darkness, screaming like a Victorian child seeing a car for the first time. My stomach did a backflip as gravity decided to take a personal day. I landed on a pile of old bones that definitely didn't smell like lavender. System, you have entered the crypt of the Forgotten King. Oh great, another Forgotten King. These guys really need to work on their SEO. I brushed the dust off my armor and looked around the dimly lit chamber. Blue flames flickered on the walls, giving the place a very haunted mansion vibe. In the center of the room stood a massive stone sarcophagus wrapped in heavy chains. I knew exactly what was coming next, because the plot demands a boss fight. The chain snapped with a sound louder than a gunshot in a library. The lid slid off, and a skeletal figure draped in tattered royal robes sat up. He gripped a rusted claymore that was easily twice the size of my ego. System, boss, King Malachor the Eternal has awakened. The king let out a hollow rattle that I assume was a very intimidating war cry. He swung the massive blade, and the air pressure alone nearly knocked me over. I rolled to the left, barely avoiding a haircut I definitely didn't ask for. My shovel felt like a toothpick compared to that absolute unit of a sword. I needed to find a weakness before this guy turned me into a human pancake. I noticed a glowing gem embedded in his ribcage, pulsing with a sickly green light. Target acquired. Now I just had to survive long enough to poke it with my stick and hope for a loot drop that isn't trash. I dodged the next swing, jumping over the blade like I was playing a lethal game of skip rope. The impact of his sword sent a shockwave through the room that rattled my very soul. I realized I couldn't keep playing defense forever if I wanted to make it to the next episode. Malachor let out a scream that sounded like a dial-up modem having a midlife crisis. I charged forward, aiming for the gap between his massive, dusty ribs. He tried to swat me away like a bothersome fly, but I was way too fast for him. I leaped into the air, my shovel glowing with the faint light of my desperate hope. My attack connected with his ribcage, but it felt like hitting a brick wall with a wet noodle. System, damage dealt, too. You might want to try harder, buddy. The king laughed, a dry, rattling sound that made my skin crawl under my armor. He swung his arm in a wide arc, catching me midair and sending me flying. I hit the stone wall so hard I'm pretty sure I saw my ancestors waving at me. I wiped the blood from my lip and stood back up, because plot armor is a hell of a drug. The gem in his chest flared brighter, signaling he was about to use a big AoE attack. I had 3 seconds to move, or I was going to become a permanent fixture of this dungeon. I sprinted toward a crumbling pillar, hoping it would provide some cover from the blast. The green energy erupted, melting the stone floor like it was made of cheap butter. I peeked out from my hiding spot and saw the king was momentarily stunned by his own power. This was my chance, the one opening I needed to end this oversized Halloween decoration. I lunged for the gem, moving faster than a teenager when they hear their parents pulling into the driveway. My fingers were inches away when his massive hand swatted me out of the air. I hit the ground and skidded, leaving a long trail of dust across the stone floor. I scrambled up, but he was already looming over me like a bill collector on the first of the month. He brought his foot down, aiming to crush me into the cold stone floor. I rolled to the side, the floor shattering exactly where my head had been a second ago. I swung my shovel at his ankle, but it had the tactical impact of a wet marshmallow. System, durability low. Shovel integrity is currently at 5%. I ignored the notification and focused on the glowing crack I'd made in his leg bone. If I could just take out his base, the entire skeleton would lose its structural integrity. He swung his sword in a vertical strike, and I knew I couldn't dodge this one. I raised my broken shovel to parry, hoping the metal would hold for one more hit. The impact vibration was intense, sending a numbing shock through my entire body. My shovel snapped in half, leaving me as defenseless as a level 1 Magikarp in a shark tank. But the force of his own blow caused his cracked leg to finally give way. The king tilted, his balance ruined as he crashed down onto one knee. This was it. His chest gem was now perfectly at eye level. I didn't have a weapon, so I balled up my fist and channeled every bit of mana I had. I punched the gem with all my might, pouring my desperation into the strike. The gem shattered, and a blinding light filled the room, erasing the darkness. I stood there panting, wondering if the devs would actually give me loot or just another thanks for playing screen. The king's massive body began to crumble into dust like he just got Thanos snapped out of existence. System, boss defeated. Experience points are being calculated. I collapsed onto the floor, my lungs burning with every ragged breath. My hands were trembling, and my mana pool was as empty as my bank account on rent day. A golden treasure chest appeared right where the king had been standing. Finally, some actual compensation for this near-death experience. I dragged myself toward the chest, hoping for a legendary drop. I opened the lid, and a soft glow illuminated my tired face. System, you have obtained the king's broken crown. Are you kidding me? A broken piece of junk after all that effort? But then, the crown started to vibrate in my hands like a Nokia from 2005. System, hidden quest, the fallen dynasty has been triggered. Great, just what I needed. More unpaid labor and less sleep. The walls of the chamber began to shake violently. I realized the entire dungeon was collapsing around me. I looked for an exit, but the way I came in was blocked by heavy rubble. A portal opened up at the back of the throne room. I didn't have time to think, so I jumped straight into the swirling blue light. Everything went dark as I felt my body being pulled through space. I woke up in a forest, surrounded by birds chirping like they were mocking my life choices. I sat up and checked my status window to see if I was still in one piece. System, level up. You have reached level 25. Finally, a decent XP bonus for almost losing my life in that hole. The forest was so quiet it felt like the developers forgot to upload the background music. I stood up while dusting off the remains of my shredded clothes. Suddenly, the sound of snapping twigs echoed from the bushes nearby. A group of 5 men stepped out, blocking my path with their weapons drawn. They were dressed like budget cosplayers who found their gear in a dumpster behind a medieval fair. The leader pointed a rusty sword at my throat with a smug grin. He demanded that I hand over every single item I found in the dungeon. I sighed, looking at the pathetic group of bandits standing before me. Their levels were so low, I felt like I was bullying NPCs in a tutorial level meant for toddlers. I didn't even bother drawing my weapon against these weaklings. The leader took my silence for fear and stepped closer. He threatened to kill me if I didn't drop my bag immediately. I let out a long yawn, staring him directly in the eyes. He lunged at me, swinging his sword with all his might. I flicked his forehead, and he flew backward faster than a speedrunner skipping a cutscene. His buddies watched in horror as their leader hit a tree and slumped over. I asked if anyone else wanted to turn to get embarrassed. The rest of the bandits dropped their weapons and fell to their knees immediately. Please spare us, great hero, they begged in perfect, pathetic unison. Great hero? I'm just a guy who hates being bothered by level 5 scrubs. I checked their pockets, but these guys were broker than a YouTuber after getting demonetized. I told them to get lost before I decided to actually use my hands. They scrambled into the bushes like cockroaches when the kitchen light turns on. I ignored their crying and continued my trek toward the nearest city, Oakhaven. The city gates were massive, clearly designed to keep out monsters, or maybe just annoying door-to-door salesmen. 2 guards stopped me at the entrance, looking at my shredded clothes with pure disgust. They blocked the path and demanded an entry fee of 10 silver coins. 10 silver? That's highway robbery, even for a generic fantasy RPG setting. I reached into my inventory and pulled out a shiny gold coin instead. Their eyes nearly popped out, and their attitude flipped faster than a toxic gamer after seeing a girl. They bowed so low I thought their heads might actually hit the pavement. The streets were crowded with merchants, adventurers, and the usual low-res background NPCs. I needed to find a decent inn to rest and finally upgrade my gear. I spotted a sign for the Rusty Tankard and headed straight inside. The smell of cheap ale and roasted meat hit me like a physical debuff. I walked up to the counter where a burly man was aggressively cleaning a glass. He asked what a kid like me was doing here, probably thinking I was lost on my way to a Pokemon tournament. I just stared at him and told him I needed a room, not a life story. Give me your best room and a meal that won't give me food poisoning. He grunted and told me the price would be 5 silver coins per night. I tossed the coins onto the counter and waited for him to hand over the key. I headed upstairs to my room, which was basically a glorified closet with a bed that smelled like a wet dog's funeral. I sat on the creaky bed and opened my system interface to check my stats. I had a handful of unspent points just waiting to be allocated to my attributes. I dumped them all into strength to ensure my physical power was truly overwhelming. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the alleyway right outside my window. I peeked outside and saw a scene so cliché, I almost expected a quest started pop up to hit me in the face. 3 thugs were cornering a girl and blocking her only path to escape. They were demanding her necklace while brandishing their weapons with malicious intent. Please, leave me alone, she cried out in a voice trembling with terror. I sighed, wondering why every fantasy world has a surplus of low-level creeps and a shortage of actual police. The leader of the thugs pulled out a rusty dagger and stepped closer to the girl. He told her that nobody was coming to save her in this part of town. I decided it was time to intervene and hopped out of the second-story window. I landed right between them, sticking the landing better than a pro gymnast who just inhaled a gallon of Red Bull. The thugs jumped back, their faces twisting into expressions of pure confusion and fear. I looked at the leader and told him that his bullying days were officially over. The leader sneered and asked who I thought I was, acting like he hadn't just seen me drop from the sky. I didn't bother answering and just cracked my knuckles, letting the sound do the talking. He lunged at me with his dagger, moving so slow I could have finished a whole Netflix series before he reached me. I sidestepped his pathetic attack and delivered a heavy punch straight to his gut. He flew backward and crashed into a pile of wooden crates, which honestly looked sturdier than his defense. The other 2 thugs looked at each other, clearly reconsidering their life choices and career paths. They roared and charged at me simultaneously, thinking that power in numbers actually works in a shonen manga. I grabbed their heads and slammed them together with a thud that sounded like 2 bowling balls colliding. They collapsed to the ground, unconscious before their bodies even realized they'd lost the fight. I turned to the girl and asked if she was alright, trying not to sound too much like a generic hero. She just stared at me with wide eyes, looking like she'd seen a ghost or a very aggressive delivery driver. She thanked me and said she didn't know what she would have done without my help. I told her to get home quickly before more trash decided to spawn in this alleyway. She nodded, grabbed her bag, and sprinted out of the alley faster than a cat caught in a bathtub. I looked down at the thugs and noticed something shiny falling out of the leader's pocket. It was a small, ornate key with a strange crest engraved on it. I picked it up, and a system notification immediately popped up in my vision like a spam email I actually wanted. It said I had obtained a secret dungeon key for a hidden location nearby. I smirked, realizing my luck was finally starting to turn around in this crazy world. I tucked the key into my inventory and headed back to the inn to finally get some sleep. I finally reached the inn, which looked like it was held together by spit, prayers, and pure spite. I tossed a few copper coins to the innkeeper and headed straight for the stairs. My room was small and smelled like dust, but it was better than sleeping in an alley. I sat on the creaky bed and pulled the secret dungeon key from my inventory. A system map appeared in the air, marking a location in the forest outside the city. I closed my eyes and tried to ignore the sound of someone snoring in the next room. I decided to get some sleep because fighting monsters while sleep-deprived is a main character privilege I don't have yet. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed and ready to break some game balance. I grabbed my gear and headed out of the city gates before the morning rush. The forest was thick with fog, making everything look like a scene from a horror movie. I reached the coordinates and found a massive, moss-covered boulder blocking a hidden path. I pressed the key against the stone, and the boulder vanished to reveal a dark tunnel. I stepped inside, and a group of giant spiders dropped from the ceiling like they were auditioning for a 90s CGI nightmare. I drew my sword and prepared to turn these overgrown bugs into a pile of loot. The first spider lunged at me, its fangs dripping with a nasty-looking green venom. I sidestepped the attack and sliced through its abdomen with a single, powerful strike. It shrieked and dissolved into pixels, leaving behind a small pile of gold and silk. The other spiders hissed in unison, clearly upset that their lunch was fighting back. I checked my status window and saw my XP bar move slower than a turtle walking through peanut butter. I smirked and charged forward, ready to clear this entire dungeon before lunch. I carved my way through the remaining spiders like a hot knife through butter. The tunnel opened up into a massive cavern lit by glowing blue mushrooms. A notification popped up telling me I had entered the web-slinger's lair. The level design here is so uninspired. I'm pretty sure the developer just copy-pasted a cave asset and called it a day. In the center of the room sat a spider the size of a double-decker bus. This was the brood mother, and she looked like she hadn't missed a meal in a century. She had 8 eyes, and I'm fairly certain every single one of them was judging my outfit. I gripped my sword tighter, feeling the adrenaline start to kick in. The brood mother screeched, a sound that definitely wasn't going to help my tinnitus. She lunged, her massive legs slamming into the ground where I stood a second ago. I rolled to the side and activated my Troll's Luck skill. The system chimed, informing me that my next attack had a 50% chance of being a critical hit. I jumped onto her back and started hacking away at her thick chitin armor. She turned bright red, because apparently, every boss needs a pissed-off phase to justify their existence. She tried to shake me off, but I held on like a toddler to a candy bar. I found a weak spot near her neck and drove my blade in with everything I had. The loot was so trash, I've seen better rewards in a mobile game's daily login bonus. I opened the chest, praying for a legendary weapon but expecting a pair of dirty socks. My XP bar finally flashed, and I felt that sweet, sweet rush of leveling up. I wiped the spider guts off my face and headed deeper into the darkness. The air grew colder, smelling significantly worse than my gym bag after a week-long workout. A faint light appeared at the end of the corridor, signaling another unskippable cutscene. I stepped into a grand hall that looked like a rejected set from a budget fantasy movie, probably funded by a single pack of ramen. Standing there was a guy in golden armor, looking way too proud of his shiny new cosplay. He was the Holy Knight of the Sun, looking like he just walked off the cover of a generic mobile game that spends 90% of its budget on ads. He pointed his sword at me and started a long-winded monologue about justice. I checked my system, desperately wondering if there was a mute button for these annoying NPCs. The system offered to trigger a strategic accidental fart for the low price of 100 points. That was the best 100 points I ever spent. The echo in this hall was absolutely legendary. The knight's face turned a shade of purple that isn't even on the official color wheel. He charged at me, his sword glowing with the power of 1,000 suns, which is basically how my eyes feel when I open my phone at 3 a.m. I sidestepped his attack with ease, feeling like I was playing Dark Souls on the absolute easiest mode. My Troll's Luck kicked in, and a convenient banana peel materialized right under his heavy boot. He slipped and crashed into a pillar, bringing down a shower of dust and pure disappointment. I stood over him, wondering why the supposed hero of this floor was such a total pushover. A new quest prompt appeared, asking me to humiliate the knight for extra rewards. I didn't even have to think twice. The system really knows my specific brand of chaos. I took his golden helmet and replaced it with a rusty bucket, giving him that level 1 crook aesthetic he truly deserved. The system dinged, granting me the new title, the fashion police of the underworld. I left him there, sobbing into his bucket, and continued my search for some actual loot. I walked further into the dark corridor, wondering if the devs forgot to pay the electricity bill. Suddenly, a massive stone door blocked my path, looking like a final boss arena entrance. I pushed the door open, and the hinges screeched louder than a middle school violin recital. Inside was a treasure chest glowing with a suspicious, definitely not a trap, golden light. My system warned me that opening it would trigger a trial of extreme danger. Naturally, I ignored the warning because loot is more important than my actual life. As soon as my hand touched the lid, the floor began to shake like a washing machine. A holographic projection of an old man appeared, looking like every wise mentor trope ever. He claimed to be the ancient sage of the void and demanded I prove my worth. I asked him if he had any actual gold or if he was just here to waste my time. The sage looked offended, his beard twitching with the rage of 1,000 Karens. He summoned 3 spectral warriors, each one looking like a generic RPG mob with a palette swap. I drew my sword, feeling the familiar itch of a combat sequence I didn't ask for. The first warrior lunged, moving with the grace of a drunk toddler on ice skates. I parried his blow and kicked him into the second warrior, scoring a double kill. The third warrior hesitated, probably realizing his AI script was severely outdated. I didn't give him a chance to rethink his life choices and finished him with a slash. The sage clapped his hands, acting like he hadn't just tried to murder me for fun. He offered me a choice between a legendary weapon or a mysterious mystery box. My inner gambler took over, and I picked the box, praying it wasn't just a pile of dirt. I slowly pried the lid open, my heart hammering against my ribs. A blinding light erupted from the box, nearly searing my retinas. As the glow faded, I realized I'd won a single, dried-up chicken wing, which is exactly what I deserve for trusting RNG. I stared at the shriveled poultry, wondering if this was a joke. The sage claimed that true power lies in the most humble of snacks. I told him if I didn't get a refund, I'd mop the floor with his beard. Suddenly, the system identified it as the god-slaying spicy wing of destiny. Apparently, one bite would grant me a temporary power boost. Before I could ask for a manager, the sage faded away like my motivation on a Monday morning. The stone door behind me creaked open, signaling the end of the trial. I stepped back into the main hall, clutching my legendary snack. But of course, a group of cultivators was already waiting for me. Leading them was a young master with a haircut that screamed, "My dad owns this entire zip code." He looked at my dusty robes and sneered with pure arrogance. He demanded I hand over the treasure from the trial room immediately. His lackeys stepped forward, flexing muscles that were clearly just for show. I sighed, realizing this cliché encounter was apparently mandatory. The system pinged me with a quest, probably because it loves watching me suffer for 5-star rewards. The objective was simple: humiliate the rich kid without breaking a sweat. I tucked the wing away and drew my sword, ready for action. The young master let out a mocking laugh that was way too loud for his own good. He sneered at my blade, asking if I really intended to fight him with that piece of junk. I checked my system, but the interface remained frustratingly silent and unhelpful. His lackeys began to circle me, their eyes filled with arrogant malice and bad intentions. He reminded me his father was the sect leader because apparently that's his only personality trait. I briefly considered using the spicy wing, but I decided to save it for a real threat. I shifted into a combat stance, feeling the spiritual energy surge through my veins. The system pinged, reminding me that my survival rate was currently lower than a crypto bro's bank account. Without warning, he lunged at me, swinging his ornate fan with murderous intent. I sidestepped his attack effortlessly, watching him stumble past me like a total amateur. The crowd gasped, clearly not expecting me to have such refined reflexes. His face turned a deep shade of red as he struggled to regain his dignity. He pulled out a glowing jade pendant, which probably had more pay-to-win stats than a mobile gacha game. "Behold the power of my ancestors," he screamed, activating the glowing artifact. The pendant erupted with light, creating a pressure that made the floorboards groan. I didn't even bother with my sword. I just slapped him so hard his ancestors felt the sting. The sound of the impact echoed through the hall, followed by a heavy, stunned silence. His lackeys froze in place, their expressions shifting from arrogance to pure shock. He hit the floor so hard, he probably discovered a new tectonic plate right under the hall. I looked down at him and asked the lackeys if they were ready to be next. The lackeys just stood there, their brains clearly trying to process how their boss got folded like laundry. One of them actually dropped his sword, which is honestly the smartest thing he's done all day. I took a single step forward, and the entire group recoiled like I'd just asked them to pay taxes. The young master scrambled backward on his hands and knees, looking more like a confused crab than a noble. He was shaking so violently that he could have powered a small city if I hooked him up to a generator. You're a dead man. My father will have your head for this," he shrieked through broken teeth. I yawned and told him that if I had a nickel for every time I heard that, I'd be retired. My system finally pinged, awarding me points for maximum disrespect and unlocking a temporary agility boost. I felt the power surge through my legs, making the world around me seem to slow down to a crawl. I blurred across the room, appearing behind the nearest lackey before he could even process my movement. I tapped his shoulder, and he screamed so loud he probably hit a note only dogs and Mariah Carey can hear. I didn't even use a weapon. I just flicked his forehead and watched him tumble into his friends. They went down like a row of dominoes, creating a pile of elite cultivators that looked more like a mosh pit. The young master realized he was alone and desperately pulled a glowing red talisman from his sleeve. This guy has more pay-to-win items in his pockets than a whale in a Chinese mobile gacha game. He slapped the talisman onto the floor, and a massive surge of red energy began to swirl around him. A booming voice echoed from the sky, demanding to know who dared to lay a hand on the sect's heir. The roof of the hall literally exploded as a bearded old man descended in a flurry of dramatic petals. He landed with a thud, his aura so thick it felt like trying to walk through a pool of cold honey. He looked at me with such intense disappointment that I felt like I'd just failed a math test in front of my mom. "Junior, do you have any idea whose blood you've spilled today?" he growled, his voice vibrating in my chest. I looked him up and down, wondering if all these cultivation elders shop at the same grumpy and bearded outlet. I told him I didn't care about his family tree unless it was made of money I could actually spend. The sect leader didn't appreciate my financial advice and raised a hand glowing with terrifying golden light. My system pinged, giving me a choice: beg for mercy or double down on the disrespect. Obviously, I chose the second one, because I'm here for a good time, not a long time. "Your son started it," I said, pointing at the heap of trash on the floor. "I was just taking out the garbage." He lunged at me, his speed so high he looked like a glitch in a poorly optimized video game. I barely managed to tilt my head as a blast of energy vaporized the wall behind me. "Is that it?" I taunted, even though my heart was doing a drum solo against my ribs. He roared, and the ground beneath us began to crack and hover under the sheer pressure of his aura. The spectators started running for their lives, finally realizing that being an extra in this scene is a death sentence. I felt the system's power surge, granting me a temporary plot armor buff that felt suspiciously like static electricity. I reached out and caught his next punch with my bare hand, which honestly surprised both of us. The shockwave from the impact sent the remaining furniture flying like it was caught in a Category 5 hurricane. I looked him dead in the eye and told him his breath smelled like he'd been eating old scrolls. The disrespect was so potent that the system awarded me enough points to level up my physical defense. He tried to pull his hand back, but I held on tight, grinning like a maniac who just found a loophole. "My turn," I whispered, feeling the system's trolling energy concentrate in my right fist. He looked so confused that I almost felt bad, like I'd just explained NFTs to a Victorian-era child. I slammed my fist into his gut, feeling the impact ripple through his expensive-looking silk robes. He flew backward, crashing through 3 stone pillars like a bowling ball hitting pins made of cardboard. The system chimed, informing me I'd just earned the Senior Citizen Abuser title, which is definitely going on my resume. He skidded to a halt, his face turning a shade of purple that usually indicates a severe allergic reaction to losing. You dare?" he sputtered, his eyes bulging with pure, unadulterated rage. I told him I dared quite a lot, actually, and asked if he wanted a second helping of these hands. He stood up, and suddenly the air temperature dropped as his killing intent flooded the courtyard. He started chanting a spell that sounded suspiciously like he was trying to summon a demon or order a very complicated Starbucks drink. A massive spectral tiger materialized behind him, roaring with enough force to blow my hair back. I checked my inventory and found a squeaky toy of distraction that the system had given me earlier. I threw it at the spectral tiger's feet, and for a second, the beast actually looked tempted to chase it. The sect leader's face contorted, his pride clearly taking more damage than his physical body. He lunged again, but I used a lag spike skill that made me teleport 3 feet to the left like a character on 500 ping. His ultimate move hit nothing but air, creating a crater in the ground that would definitely fail a safety inspection. I took the opportunity to kick him in the rear, sending him face first into the dirt. The system rewarded me with a critical disrespect bonus, doubling my current speed stats. I stood over him and asked if he needed a map to find his dignity, because it clearly wasn't in this zip code. He tried to summon his sword, but my system blocked the connection like a firewall protecting a government database. I realized then that being a troll in a cultivation world isn't just a hobby, it's a lifestyle. I looked at the remaining elders and asked who was next, because I was just getting warmed up. The elders exchanged looks of pure terror, probably realizing their retirement plans just went up in smoke. One guy stepped forward, shaking so hard, he looked like a vibrating phone on a marble table during a telemarketing spree. He pulled out a jade pendant that started glowing with a light brighter than a flashbang in a dark room. I yawned, making sure he saw just how much his ultimate treasure was boring me to tears. The system popped up a notification asking if I wanted to activate mute mode for his monologue. I hit yes, and suddenly his voice was replaced by the sound of a kazoo playing a sad song. He looked confused, his mouth moving like a fish out of water while the kazoo blared in the background. I stepped toward him, and he tripped over his own robes. Honestly, these long-winded cultivators need to discover sweatpants. I grabbed the jade pendant right out of his hand, feeling the godly power within it. The system asked if I wanted to recycle the item for 50 points or eat it for the vine. Obviously, I chose to eat it, and it tasted like a mix of peppermint and regret. My skin started glowing neon green, which is a bold fashion choice even for a cultivation genius. The elders backed away, probably thinking I was about to explode or turn into a radioactive monster. Instead, I just let out a massive burp that sent a shockwave through the entire courtyard. The shockwave knocked the hats off everyone, exposing more bald spots than a midlife crisis convention. I asked if that was all while picking my teeth with a splinter from the sect leader's broken throne. The air grew heavy as the Grand Ancestor finally decided to stop napping and join the party. He descended from the sky on a golden cloud, looking like he'd been waiting 500 years for this dramatic entrance. I checked his power level and the system just displayed a loading icon, which is never a great sign. I looked at the camera and told you guys that if I die here, please delete my browser history. The Grand Ancestor landed and glared at me with eyes full of ancient judgment and disappointment. He stroked his long white beard, which was so long it probably had its own dedicated security team and a zip code. Young man, you have caused quite a disturbance in my sect, he rumbled in a voice like a bass-boosted subwoofer. I checked my system again, but the loading bar was still stuck at 99%. He raised a hand, and the spiritual energy in the air started condensing into a giant golden palm. This was the classic heavenly palm move, the ultimate get-off-my-lawn gesture for cultivators who haven't updated their move set since the Stone Age. I stood my ground, even though my knees were shaking like they were auditioning for a Jell-O commercial. The system finally dinged, identifying the target as a level 999 boomer with a serious ego problem. It offered me a new skill called reverse psychology for the low price of my remaining dignity. I hit accept instantly because pride doesn't exactly block giant golden hands from crushing your skull. As the palm descended, I just sat down and started crying like my favorite show got canceled on a cliffhanger. The Grand Ancestor froze, his giant golden hand hovering just inches above my head. He looked genuinely confused, probably because nobody had ever tried the toddler tantrum defense before. "Why are you weeping, child?" he asked, his intimidating aura flickering like a dying light bulb. I told him I was just so moved by his majestic beard that I couldn't contain my overwhelming emotions. You could practically hear the gears grinding in his ancient brain as he tried to process that level of shameless suck-up. The system notified me that his aggression meter was dropping faster than a scammy crypto coin after a rug pull. He actually started blushing, which was honestly more terrifying to witness than the giant death palm he was just holding. He dismissed the golden palm and reached out to pat my head, looking like a proud, confused grandfather. I smirked at the camera because I just defeated a legendary boss using nothing but weaponized flattery and tears. "My boy, your appreciation for fine facial hair shows you have a truly enlightened soul," the ancestor declared. He then announced to the entire sect that I was now his top-tier personal disciple. The crowd went silent, their faces looking like they'd all collectively stepped on a Lego in the dark. I checked my system notifications, which were popping off like a toxic group chat on a Friday night. I just unlocked the legendary Gaslighter title, which honestly felt like a personal attack from the game's developers. Suddenly, a guy in a fancy silk robe stepped forward, looking like he smelled something incredibly foul. It was the sect's #1 genius, who clearly hadn't gotten the memo that I was the protagonist now. "Grand Ancestor, you can't be serious. This clown just cried his way into the inner circle," he shrieked. I looked at him and sighed, putting on my best disappointed parent expression. "Jealousy is a bad look on you, bro. It really brings out the disposable background character in your eyes." The system prompted me to use a skill called toxic positivity to finish him off. I grabbed his hand and told him I believed in his potential to be almost as good as me. His face turned a shade of purple that I didn't even know existed in the natural world. He tried to swing at me, but the Grand Ancestor blocked him with a single, disappointed finger. "How dare you strike my favorite beard appreciator?" the old man roared, sending the genius flying. He hit the wall so hard, he basically became a permanent piece of the sect's architecture, 0 out of 10. With the competition literally flattened, I asked the ancestor for a small token of his appreciation. I pointed at a dusty, rectangular object in the corner that everyone else thought was a doorstop. It was the God-slaying brick, a weapon that scales its damage based on how much the user trolls. I tucked my new brick under my arm and headed toward the VIP dorms, feeling like a total menace. I stepped into the VIP dorms, and my jaw hit the floor faster than a crypto crash. This wasn't just a room. It was a 5-star presidential suite designed for a literal god. The spiritual energy was so thick I could practically drink it like a high-end protein shake. Suddenly, my system chimed in with a notification sound that was way too cheerful. "Ding, paradise detected. Would the host like to activate AFK slacker mode and give up on life?" I hit yes instantly because working hard is for side characters who don't have plot armor. Just as I was about to embrace my inner couch potato, someone started pounding on my door. I opened it to find a junior sister with twin tails looking like a generic anime trope. She blushed harder than a tomato and handed me a letter with trembling hands. A love letter, I thought, my ego inflating faster than a balloon in a vacuum. I opened it, but instead of poetry, it said, "Tomorrow afternoon, back mountain woods, be there." The signature belonged to that #1 genius who the ancestor had just yeeted into a wall. Seriously? This guy wants an offline PK after getting bodied by a single finger? The system chimed in. New mission. Completely shatter his mental state during your little date. The reward was an upgrade blueprint for my god-slaying brick, which I desperately needed. I patted the brick in my robe and let out a smile that screamed, I am the villain. The next afternoon, I showed up at the grove exactly on time, looking incredibly unbothered. The genius was waiting there, clutching a glowing sword like he was auditioning for a fantasy epic. He glared at me with enough salt to season 1,000 orders of large fries. Today, I'll prove that your cheap tricks are worthless against my absolute main character strength. I just stood there, picking my ear like his grand speech was a boring terms and conditions agreement. Absolute strength? I asked, genuinely wondering if he'd forgotten getting slapped by the ancestor earlier. He lunged forward, his sword trailing light like a budget Star Wars special effect from the 70s. My system pinged. Warning, enemy is using 100% of his brain cells, both of them. I didn't even bother drawing a real weapon. I just whipped out my trusty god-slaying brick. The look of pure confusion on his face was worth more than my entire cultivation base. He swung his legendary blade, but I just sidestepped like I was playing a lag-free rhythm game. Is that all you've got? I yawned, making sure he saw how incredibly bored I was. He turned redder than a streamer who just got caught using wall hacks in a pro tournament. He unleashed his ultimate move, a flaming dragon that looked suspiciously like a giant, angry, spicy noodle. I raised the brick and activated the mental damage passive ability just for the vibes. A massive mist floated over my head, and I swear I could hear the game engine wheezing. I tapped him on the shoulder, and he jumped like he'd just seen his actual bank account balance. Hey buddy, you forgot to turn on your plot armor today, I whispered right in his ear. I slammed the brick onto his foot, and the sound it made was surprisingly, hilariously musical. He let out a scream that was definitely 3 octaves higher than a genius should ever be. The system notification popped up, mental stability, 50%, and dropping faster than a lead balloon in a vacuum. He tried to retreat, but his legs were shaking like a newborn giraffe trying to walk on ice. I held up the brick again, and he actually flinched like I was his disappointed mother holding a sandal. Wait, I surrender, he yelled, throwing his expensive sword away like it was radioactive garbage. I looked at the sword on the ground, and then at his trembling, pathetic hands. Surrender? But I haven't even started the humiliation phase of this encounter yet. The system chimed. Host has successfully traumatized a genius. Reward, 5,000 shameless points. His pride was evaporating faster than my bank account balance during a Steam summer sale after a few drinks. The crowd was so silent you could hear the animator's coffee machine running in the background. Suddenly, an old man with a beard long enough to be a safety hazard descended from the sky. Who dares bully my disciple? He roared, sounding like a boomer who just realized his favorite buffet closed early. I rolled my eyes so hard, I nearly gave myself a permanent neurological condition. Do you guys come in a multipack, or is there a buy one elder, get one free deal? The old man's face turned a shade of purple that really didn't go with his robes. He released his spirit pressure, trying to crush me with the weight of his massive ego. My system pinged. Enemy is trying to flex. Would you like to activate Ultimate Know You? I hit the yes button faster than a thirsty simp double-tapping a streamer's new selfie on a lonely Friday night. His aura hit an invisible wall and snapped back, hitting him like a freight train made of karma. He tumbled backward, his majestic robes flapping like a wet trash bag caught in a Category 5 hurricane. Impossible. A mere foundation establishment brat shouldn't have this much power, he shrieked. I just stood there, casually cleaning the dust off my brick like it was a piece of fine jewelry. Power is relative, old man, and right now, you're looking like a distant, broke cousin. I took one step forward, and the entire sect backed away like I was carrying a contagious disease. If this is the legendary Heavenly Sword sect, then I'm definitely in the wrong neighborhood. The elder's face went from purple to a ghostly white, his bravado leaking out like a popped balloon. You're not a foundation establishment cultivator. No one at that level has such a terrifying physical body. I tossed the brick up and caught it, feeling the weight of his fear hanging in the air. It's called a gym membership, old man. You should try lifting something heavier than your own ego for once. He gritted his teeth and pulled out a jade talisman, his eyes gleaming with a last-ditch effort at relevance. I'll summon the sect guard. You won't leave this mountain alive, you arrogant little brat. The system chimed. Warning, high-level NPCs are approaching. Time to turn the disrespect dial up to 11. I stood my ground, watching as a golden barrier began to form around the entire courtyard. This barrier was thicker than the plot armor of a generic shonen protagonist in the final episode. Is this it? The best the Heavenly Sword sect can offer is a fancy cage. I mocked. I took a deep breath, channeling my energy into the brick until it started glowing with a menacing light. The disciples watched in horror as I prepared to do the unthinkable to their precious mountain-protecting array. I slammed the brick against the golden wall, and the sound was like 1,000 glass windows shattering at once. The barrier didn't just break, it disintegrated into sparkles, looking like a glitter bomb went off at a funeral. The elder fell to his knees, his spirit clearly broken along with his sect's expensive security system. I leaned in close, my voice low and cold enough to freeze the blood in his veins. Your sect's heavenly reputation is about as real as a hot singles in your area advertisement. I turned my back on him, knowing the system was about to rain down a massive jackpot of points. If anyone else wants to challenge me, make sure you bring a bigger brick next time. I walked away, the silence behind me louder than any roar of defiance could ever be. I felt a sudden surge of heat in my chest as the system notifications started spamming my vision. The disrespect points were rolling in faster than a crypto scammer's bank account during a bull run. Ding. Host has successfully traumatized an entire generation of sword cultivators. Reward, 50,000 points. I smirked, checking my inventory to see if I'd unlocked any new ways to ruin someone's day. Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble, and a massive shadow loomed over the courtyard. A giant stone statue was coming to life, moving with all the grace of a drunk uncle at a wedding. Who dares disturb the eternal slumber of the sect founder? A booming voice echoed through the air. I looked up at the 50-foot-tall rock monster and sighed, wondering why every sect has a giant statue. I do, I shouted back, and your eternal slumber was honestly doing the world a favor. The statue roared, its stone fist descending toward me like a falling skyscraper. I didn't even flinch. I just gripped my brick tighter, feeling the system's power coursing through my arm. My defensive stats were so high now that this giant fist looked about as threatening as a wet marshmallow. I met the stone fist with my bare hand, and the impact sent a shockwave that leveled the nearby buildings. Cracks spiderwebbed up the statue's arm, the sound of grinding rock filling the air. Is that all? I asked, my voice cutting through the dust and debris. The statue's eyes glowed red, and it tried to pull back, but I wasn't finished with it yet. I leaped into the air, aiming straight for the statue's oversized, rocky forehead. I hit that thing so hard it probably felt the impact in its previous life, if rocks even have those. The entire sect founder's monument exploded into a million pieces, raining pebbles down on the terrified disciples. I landed perfectly on my feet, dusted off my shoulder, and checked my watch for the next plot twist. Ding! You've successfully turned the sect's pride into a pile of very expensive gravel. The disciples stared at the rubble, their faces frozen in a state of permanent error 404. Suddenly, an old man with a beard longer than a CVS receipt floated down from the inner sanctum. You destroyed the sacred ancestor, he shrieked, his voice hitting a painful high note. I looked at him and yawned, wondering if these guys ever practiced anything besides dramatic gasping. This was the Great Elder, a man whose ego was clearly much larger than his actual power level. He waved his hand, summoning a storm of spirit swords that looked like a budget Marvel movie CGI. I stood there, letting the deadly swords bounce off my chest like they were made of foam. Is this a boss fight or a light show? I asked, checking my nails for extra disrespect. The Great Elder's face turned a shade of purple that I didn't even know existed in nature. He charged at me, his palms glowing with a technique that probably had a 20-word name. I didn't move an inch, just waited for him to get close enough to smell his herbal tea. I didn't even need my brick for this. A simple flick of my finger sent him flying. He landed face first in the dirt, looking like a failed TikTok challenge gone horribly wrong. The system chimed in, awarding me points for elder abuse and extreme architectural vandalism. Amidst the dust, I noticed a glowing box hidden within the statue's hollow chest. I walked over and kicked the debris aside, reaching for the mysterious loot. It was a manual for a technique that was about as useful as a skip ad button on a billboard. The Art of Invisible Breathing, I read aloud, wondering why anyone would even bother writing this. Before I could even check the stats, the sky turned dark and a new boss bar appeared. A shadow loomed over the courtyard, making the sun look like it just gave up and went home. Out of the clouds stepped a guy wearing enough gold to fund a small country's national debt. This was the sect leader, looking like he just stepped out of a how to be a generic villain photoshoot. You dare disturb the peace of my mountain? He boomed, his voice echoing like a bad reverb pedal. I looked at the boss bar, which was so long it was literally clipping off the edge of my screen. I just shrugged and asked if he had any better loot than the last guy. He didn't appreciate the joke, and his aura started crushing the floor tiles into fine powder. My system started pinging me with warnings that I was 100% ignoring. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the invisible breathing manual I just found. The sect leader launched a giant golden palm at me that was definitely compensating for something. I didn't even dodge. I just stood there and started reading the first page of the manual. The giant palm hit me and shattered like a cheap ceramic plate from the dollar store. Everyone's jaws dropped, so hard I'm surprised they didn't break their collarbones. Is that all? I asked, finally looking up from the manual's table of contents. He screamed in rage, his hair turning white and standing up like he'd stuck a fork in a toaster. He pulled out a spear that was glowing with enough energy to power a city for a year. I realized the invisible breathing technique was actually just a way to hide your presence from the plot. I took one step forward, and the entire mountain range groaned under the pressure of my flex. I flicked a pebble at him, and it broke the sound barrier before he could even blink. He went flying through 3 different buildings, and I honestly started feeling bad for the construction crew. I walked over to the crater, wondering if he was actually dead or just being dramatic. He crawled out of the rubble, looking like a wet cat that just fought a lawnmower. He stood up and activated his blood sacrifice move, which is basically just a fancy way of saying he's having a midlife crisis. Red mist surrounded him, and I could practically hear the edgy boss music starting to play. My system popped up a warning saying his power level was over 9,000. I just yawned and asked if he was done with the special effects yet. He roared something about ancestral pride and charged at me with his spear. The disciples were staring at me like I just told them Santa Claus isn't real and their cultivation is a lie. I raised my hand and caught the spear tip between two fingers. The shockwave cleared the dust, revealing his face twisted in absolute disbelief. He pulled out a heaven-shattering pearl that looked suspiciously like a spicy meatball from a sketchy food truck. He threw it at me, screaming that this would be my final resting place. I just swatted it back at him like I was playing a casual game of tennis. The explosion was impressive, but I was more worried about getting dust on my new boots. A golden chest dropped from the sky, because apparently, this world has RPG physics now. I kicked the chest open and found a bunch of pills that smelled like old gym socks. The sect leader was finally down for the count, twitching like a bug on a windshield. I looked at the ruins of his throne room and realized his interior decorator definitely didn't plan for main character energy. I turned to the remaining elders and asked if anyone else wanted to lose their health insurance. They all shook their heads and bowed so fast they probably got whiplash. I started looting the place like a professional porch pirate during a Black Friday sale. I found a hidden passage behind the throne that smelled like damp secrets. I headed down the stairs, half expecting a jump scare or a decent boss fight. At the bottom was a stone door with more locks than a paranoid billionaire's vault. I didn't have the key, so I decided to use my fist instead. The door shattered into a million pieces, which definitely voided the manufacturer's warranty. Inside was a girl chained to a pillar, looking like a tragic anime protagonist. She looked up at me, her eyes glowing with some serious plot armor energy. I broke her chains with a flick of my wrist, making it look effortless. She told me she was the saintess of the eternal flame, or something equally extra. I told her to skip the lore dump because my patience was already redlining. She claimed the sect leader was just a puppet for a much bigger organization. Of course he was, because villains in this world have more phases than a final boss. She handed me a jade slip that supposedly contained the map to their headquarters. My system pinged, confirming a new main quest with rewards that didn't suck. I grabbed the jade slip and tucked it away, feeling like a true gamer. The saintess asked if I would protect her, giving me those classic puppy dog eyes. I told her she could follow me, but only if she didn't slow me down. We walked out of the ruins, leaving the elders to contemplate their life choices and medical bills. Onward to the next city, where I'm sure another arrogant young master awaits. We reached the gates of Cloudrest City, the supposed hub for the bigger organization. The city walls were so high, they probably had their own oxygen masks for the guards. The line for entry was longer than a midnight release for a game that's actually finished. A guard stopped us, looking like he was itching for a bribe or a reason to be a jerk. He looked at the saintess and then at my dusty robes with pure condescension. He told us commoners had to pay a triple tax just to breathe the city air. I reached into my storage ring, but not for the gold he was expecting. I pulled out the sect leader's token I'd borrowed from his cooling corpse. The guard's face went from arrogant to, I just pooped myself in record time. A golden carriage pulled up right then, looking like it was customized by a 12-year-old with infinite GTA mods. A guy stepped out wearing enough jewelry to sink a small merchant vessel. He demanded to know why trash was blocking the path of the great young master. My system pinged, identifying him as the local governor's son and a total level 1 scrub. He took one look at the saintess and decided he was in a romance novel. He offered to buy her from me, which is a great way to get a one-way ticket to the afterlife. The saintess looked at me, waiting to see if I'd play the hero or just keep walking. I sighed, realizing I was about to ruin this guy's day faster than a copyright strike ruins a montage. I told him his face was an eyesore and his carriage was tacky as hell. He screamed for his bodyguards to kill me, which was their cue to enter the meat grinder. I prepared to hit him so hard his ancestors would feel the lag. The bodyguards lunged at me all at once, clearly lacking any sense of self-preservation. I didn't even bother drawing my sword. My fists were more than enough for these NPCs who clearly skipped the tutorial. I sidestepped the first guy, letting him faceplant into the dirt with a satisfying thud. The second one tried a high kick, but his form was absolutely pathetic and slow. I tapped his pressure point, and he folded faster than a cheap lawn chair during a hurricane. The crowd gasped in shock, probably because they've never seen someone actually fight back. The young master's jaw dropped as he watched his elite men fail miserably. He started stuttering about his father, the governor, as if his family tree was a shield. I walked toward him, and he scrambled back in pure, unadulterated terror. I asked him if he had any more guards left, or if he was done playing. He pulled out a glowing jade talisman and held it high with trembling hands. The talisman shattered, releasing a blinding pillar of light that shot into the sky. A massive pressure filled the air, signaling the arrival of a generic level 50 boss who definitely spent too much on microtransactions. An old man appeared in the smoke, radiating a powerful aura that made the ground shake. He demanded to know who dared to lay a hand on the young master of the city. I pointed at the brat and told the old man his ward was a complete disgrace. The old man's eyes narrowed as he prepared to strike me down for my insolence. He unleashed his full power, trying to crush my spirit with his cultivation pressure. I just stood there, completely unaffected, because my plot armor is thicker than the terms and conditions nobody ever reads. I told him he had exactly 3 seconds to get out of my way before things got ugly. The old man laughed, clearly thinking I was just some delusional kid who'd watched way too much shonen anime. He lunged forward with a palm technique that was glowing with a strange, eerie light. I didn't move an inch, just watched as his ultimate move came flying toward my face. The moment his palm touched my chest, a massive shockwave rippled out, shattering every window nearby. But instead of me flying back, he was the one who looked like he just hit a brick wall made of pure vibranium. I grabbed his wrist before he could even think about retreating back to his master. His eyes widened in pure disbelief as he realized his power meant nothing against me. I twisted his arm just a little, and the sound of his bones popping was like music to my ears. He screamed in agony, his dignified, elder persona vanishing faster than my motivation on a Monday morning. The young master tried to bolt, but I wasn't about to let him leave before I was finished. I flicked a pebble at his ankle, sending him face first into a pile of actual, literal garbage. The old man started begging for mercy, claiming he was only following the governor's orders. I told him that just following orders is a pathetic excuse that won't save his skin today. I tossed the old man aside like a piece of trash without even looking at him. The young master was shaking so hard, I honestly thought he was trying to glitch through the map and escape the cutscene. I stood over him and asked if he still wanted to explain the hierarchy of the city to me. He couldn't even speak, just making pathetic whimpering noises while staring at me in horror. Suddenly, a fancy carriage pulled up bearing the official seal of the city governor. The crowd went silent as the carriage door opened, revealing a man draped in expensive silks. He stepped out onto the pavement, his eyes scanning the chaos with cold, calculating fury. This guy looked like he owned the place, which, to be fair, he actually did. He looked at his beaten-up son and the broken old man, and his face turned a lovely shade of, "I'm going to murder you." I just stood there with my hands in my pockets, waiting for the inevitable, "Do you know who I am?" speech. He didn't even look at the trash pile his son was sitting in. He just kept his eyes locked on me. "Who gave you the right to spill blood in my city?" he asked, his voice sounding like gravel in a blender. I explained that his son started it, but logic doesn't work on NPCs with a room temperature IQ. He signaled his guards, who spawned in like a high-level raid party ready to wipe the floor with me. Each one of them was armed to the teeth and looking way more competent than the old man I just folded. The governor demanded I kneel and accept my execution to preserve the dignity of the law. I almost laughed out loud because dignity is usually just code for, "I'm rich and you're not." I took a step forward, and the guards all shifted their weight, looking nervous despite their fancy armor. The governor's aura started to flare up, and I realized he was actually a decent level for a mid-tier boss. He drew a sword so shiny and expensive it probably cost more than a small country's entire GDP. The air around us grew heavy, making it hard for the commoners to even breathe. I just yawned, wondering if this fight would be over in time for me to find a decent lunch spot. He lunged at me with a speed that would have been impressive if I hadn't already seen it 1,000 times. His blade whistled through the air, aiming straight for my neck with lethal precision. I parried the strike with 2 fingers, catching the blade like it was a dull butter knife. His face went pale when he realized his pay-to-win legendary gear couldn't pierce my free-to-play plot armor. I leaned in and whispered that if he wanted to play hero, he should have brought a bigger sword. His eyes nearly popped out of his skull, probably wondering where his invincibility frames went. I gave him a smug grin, letting him know that his expensive toy was now just a paperweight. He tried to yank the sword back, but it was stuck tighter than a jar of pickles in a gym rat's kitchen. I didn't budge an inch, enjoying the sight of a powerful man sweating over a couple of fingers. He roared in frustration, channeling every bit of his energy into a desperate, glowing aura. The ground beneath us cracked, but I just stood there like I was waiting for a bus. With a flick of my wrist, I snapped his $1,000,000 blade like it was a cheap breadstick at an all-you-can-eat buffet. The recoil sent him stumbling back, his dignity crumbling faster than his weapon. He looked at the broken hilt in his hand, then back at me, his brain clearly rebooting. "Kill him," he screamed at his guards, his voice hitting a pitch only dogs could hear. The guards charged at me with all the coordination of a group of toddlers fighting over a juice box. I didn't even bother drawing a weapon. I just swung my arm in a wide, lazy arc. A wave of force sent the entire front line flying backward like they'd been hit by a freight train. They hit the stone walls with a series of satisfying thuds, effectively exiting the conversation. The governor started stuttering about his powerful cousins, sounding like a desperate influencer losing his blue check mark. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, and he actually tripped over his own feet. His son tried to crawl away from the trash pile, looking like a very pathetic, very bruised turtle. I didn't even look at the kid. My focus was entirely on the man who thought he ran this town. He reached into his robes, probably looking for a smoke bomb or a get-out-of-jail-free card. I grabbed his collar before he could move, ending his career as a local tyrant right then and there. I hoisted him up by the collar until his feet left the ground. I whispered a final, terrifying warning into his ear. The onlookers stared in silence, their mouths hanging open like they were all auditioning for a fly-catching contest. A pathetic little squeak was the only sound he could manage. I snatched a golden medallion from his belt with a quick, fluid motion. He blubbered a pathetic plea for mercy while trembling in my grip. I threw him to the ground like he was yesterday's trash. I turned my attention toward the mansion to find the real treasure. The remaining guards stepped back with trembling weapons. I strolled toward the treasury, feeling like a speedrunner who just found a glitch to skip the final boss. The massive iron doors were completely useless against my current strength. One kick was enough to shatter the impenetrable entrance into pieces. Inside, the room was filled with enough gold to make a dragon have a midlife crisis. A heavenly jade pearl sat on a pedestal, glowing with an eerie light. I reached out and claimed the artifact as my own. A hidden crossbow trap suddenly fired a bolt directly at my temple. I caught the bolt between two fingers without even turning my head. The governor's son cowered in the doorway, paralyzed by pure terror. My power level spiked so hard that my internal HUD was basically throwing a rave in my brain. I walked out of the mansion without a single regret. I strolled down the street, the heavenly jade pearl feeling heavy in my pocket. Suddenly, a group of black-clad assassins dropped from the rooftops like they were auditioning for a low-budget Ninja Turtles reboot. They surrounded me instantly, their blades glinting menacingly under the moonlight. "Hand over the pearl," their leader hissed, sounding like he'd been practicing his generic villain voice in the shower. I let out a long sigh, wondering if these NPCs ever get tired of following the same script. I drew my own blade, the edge humming with a lethal amount of spiritual energy. The first assassin lunged forward, his strike reeking of desperation and bad footwork. I parried his blade and sent him flying into a fruit stall, because every action scene needs a cabbage merchant's ruined day. Two more goons rushed in, clearly attempting a flanking maneuver they hadn't practiced enough. I spun in a tight circle, my blade cutting through the air with surgical precision. They hit the pavement hard, clutching their wounds and groaning in synchronized failure. The leader's eyes went wide as he realized he had severely miscalculated my power level. He turned to flee, but I used a movement skill to appear right behind him. I tapped him on the shoulder, giving him the kind of jump scare that ruins lives. He swung his dagger wildly, missing me by a margin wider than the plot holes in this story. I disarmed him with a casual flick of my wrist and a look of pure boredom. "Who sent you?" I asked, even though the answer was written all over his face. He stayed silent, showing a level of loyalty that was honestly just a waste of time. I decided to leave him tied up for the city guards to find later. I vanished into the shadows, heading toward my next objective before the sun could rise. I arrived at the gates of the Hidden Dragon Pavilion just as the sun started peeking over the horizon. The guards at the entrance looked like they were allergic to joy and probably got paid in exposure and stale crackers. One of them stepped forward, his heavy armor making a loud, metallic clatter with every step. "Halt! This area is off limits to commoners," he barked, his voice dripping with unearned authority. I rolled my eyes so hard I almost saw my own brain, wondering if these guards were all mass-produced in a generic NPC factory. I pulled out a jade token I'd borrowed from a high-ranking official during my last mission. The guard's face went pale, his eyes bulging as he recognized the authority I held. He bowed so low his forehead practically kissed the dirt in a display of pure terror. I walked past him without a word, leaving the poor guy shivering in his boots. Inside, the pavilion was filled with gold-leafed pillars and expensive tapestries that screamed extreme wealth. I spotted my contact sitting in a secluded corner, his face partially hidden by the brim of his hat. He was a middle-aged merchant named Old Man Shun, a guy who definitely has more skeletons in his closet than a spirit Halloween store. "You have the pearl?" he whispered, his eyes darting nervously around the crowded room. I placed the heavenly jade pearl on the table, and the room was instantly bathed in a brilliant emerald glow. He gasped, his hands trembling as he reached for the artifact. Before he could touch it, a loud crash echoed through the hall as the front doors were kicked wide open. A young man in silk robes burst in, followed by a group of massive bodyguards who looked incredibly dangerous. "That pearl belongs to the Great Fong clan," he shouted, pointing a finger directly at my chest. I sighed, realizing I was about to deal with yet another arrogant noble who didn't know when to quit. I leaned back in my chair, ready to watch this arrogant young master speedrun his own funeral. The silk-robed brat strutted toward my table like he owned the air I was breathing. "Hand over the pearl, and maybe I'll let you leave with all your limbs attached," he sneered. I looked at him, then at the pearl, then back at his incredibly punchable face. "Sorry, I don't speak entitled rich kid, so could you repeat that in a language that doesn't smell like daddy's money?" His face turned a lovely shade of ripe tomato as his bodyguards stepped forward. Old Man Shun was already trying to phase through the wall like a glitchy Bethesda character. "I am Fong Wei, the third successor of the Great Fong clan," he shrieked. He reached for the pearl, his fingers trembling with a mix of greed and arrogance. I tapped my chin, wondering if these guys get a bulk discount on those generic villain silk robes. Before his hand could even get close, I flicked a peanut from the table right at his forehead. The sound of the impact was more satisfying than hitting a skip ad button on a 30-minute video. He stumbled back, clutching his forehead in shock while his eyes burned with rage. "Kill him. Break every bone in his body," he screamed, losing whatever cool he thought he had. The two bodyguards lunged at me, their fists glowing with a faint, aggressive aura. I didn't even bother standing up. I just tilted my chair back to dodge the first swing. Their coordination was so bad I honestly felt insulted that they thought this would work. I grabbed the edge of the table and flipped it toward the oncoming guards. While they were distracted, I landed 2 quick jabs to their solar plexuses. They both collapsed instantly, their breath leaving them in a single, painful wheeze. I scooped up the heavenly jade pearl and gave Feng Wei a wink that probably ruined his week. Feng Wei stood there, his mouth hanging open like a broken vending machine that just ate my last dollar. You actually dared to strike my men?" he stammered, his voice hitting a high-pitched squeak. I just shrugged, because apparently, common sense isn't a requirement for being a spoiled young master. I tossed the pearl into the air and caught it with a smug, punchable smirk. "If you want it back, tell your dad to come and ask me nicely," I said. The onlookers gasped, probably wondering if I had a death wish or just 0 brain cells. Old Mansion finally poked his head out from behind a wine barrel like a nervous turtle. "Kid, you've just signed your own death warrant with the Fong clan," he hissed at me. I ignored his panic and started walking toward the exit, feeling like the main character I am. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped faster than a crypto coin after a billionaire's bad tweet. A cold, sharp voice echoed from the entrance, stopping me dead in my tracks. "Leaving so soon? You haven't even paid for the broken furniture yet, peasant." I turned around to see a man in sleek black armor leaning against the doorframe. His presence felt like a heavy weight pressing down on everyone's shoulders in the room. Feng Wei's eyes lit up like he'd just found a legendary loot box in a pay-to-win mobile game. "Elder brother, this trash stole our clan's treasure and humiliated our family name." "Great, another Fong family member. I should start a loyalty card for punching these guys." The newcomer didn't even look at his brother. His icy eyes were locked onto mine. I gripped the pearl tighter, feeling its ancient power hum against my sweaty palm. This guy looked way more dangerous, like a level 99 final boss showing up in the tutorial area. He took a step forward, his boots clanking like a heavy metal drummer on a rampage. "Hand over the frost pearl," he growled, his voice vibrating in my very marrow. I looked at the pearl, then back at him, giving him my most unimpressed stare. "I don't take orders from guys who dress like they're auditioning for a low-budget Batman reboot," I replied. The onlookers gasped, their faces turning pale as they backed away from the coming storm. Fong Emo didn't even blink. He just slowly unsheathed a massive, jagged black blade. A notification popped up in my vision, glowing with a mischievous purple light. System, new quest. Insult the elder brother's fashion sense for 500 disrespect points. The system was basically begging me to be a menace, and who was I to refuse? I cleared my throat and pointed directly at his oversized, spiky shoulder pads. "Seriously though, do those spikes help with the Wi-Fi signal, or are you just compensating for something?" Fong Mo's stoic expression shattered, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged at me, his sword cutting through the air with a terrifying, high-pitched whistle. I activated my phantom step just as the blade sliced through the space I occupied. I reappeared behind him, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "You're a bit slow for a supposed genius, don't you think?" I taunted. He spun around, his eyes glowing with a faint, murderous blue light. The floor beneath his feet cracked as he channeled his inner energy for a killing blow. I realized then that my disrespect strategy might actually get me killed this time. But hey, if I die, at least I'll go out with a high score and a legendary amount of salt in the comments. So this old guy really thinks he's the main character of this arc. I just stood there, watching him stroke his beard like it granted him extra IQ. He started yapping about heavenly laws and insolent brats for the 100th time. Seriously, I was 2 seconds away from falling asleep right in front of him. Finally, he stopped the monologue and decided to actually do something. A massive wave of spiritual pressure crashed down, trying to crush my soul. The floorboards were screaming louder than my PC fan running a heavy game. Everyone else was faceplanting, but I was just vibing in the middle of it. I gave him a look that basically said, "Is that all you've got, Grandpa?" The old man's eyes widened like he just saw his crypto portfolio crash. He couldn't process how a lowly brat like me was still standing. I took 1 step forward, and the ground shattered like my last relationship. It was time to show him that his cultivation level was just a fake stat. I channeled my inner power, and the air started buzzing like a broken microwave. His face went from arrogant master to terrified toddler in record time. I didn't even need a sword to deal with this budget-tier boss. With a simple flick of my finger, I sent a shockwave his way. He flew back, so hard he broke through 3 solid stone pillars. Now that's what I call a dramatic exit, 10 out of 10 for the physics. I dusted off my sleeves and wondered if the next guy would actually be a challenge. The silence in the courtyard was so heavy you could practically hear my ego inflating to the size of a parade float. I looked down at the old man, who was now buried under a pile of rubble. A group of disciples rushed forward, their swords trembling visibly in their hands. They looked like a bunch of level 1 NPCs trying to raid a world boss with nothing but wooden spoons and a dream. One kid stepped forward and demanded a formal apology for my actions. I just stood there, completely unimpressed by their collective outrage. My system notifications started popping off like a toxic group chat that just discovered a leaked celebrity photo. I told them to bring out their sect leader before I lost my patience. Suddenly, the sky darkened and a chilling pressure descended over the entire area. A figure in pitch-black robes drifted down from the heavens like a shadow. He landed with a thud, looking like he'd spent way too much time at a Hot Topic trying to find the perfect edgelord outfit. This was clearly the sect leader, and he looked absolutely livid. He glanced at the unconscious old man and then fixed his eyes on me. To kill is one thing, but to humiliate our sect is an unforgivable sin. I told him his sect's honor wasn't worth the breath he used to defend it. He didn't take the criticism well and unleashed a wave of purple energy. The ground beneath my feet groaned as the pressure intensified tenfold. He pulled out a sword that was glowing with an ominous, dark light. I didn't even bother to draw a weapon. I just kept my hands in my pockets. It was time to see if this man could actually back up his threats. He lunged at me with a speed that would have been impressive if I hadn't already seen it coming. The purple energy around his sword was screaming, "I'm the main villain of this arc." I just stood there, wondering if I left the stove on back at my home base. As the blade reached my neck, I caught it with 2 fingers like I was picking up a dirty sock. The sect leader's face went from arrogant god to confused toddler in approximately 0 seconds. I could feel the system practically vibrating in my pocket, thirsty for all that sweet, sweet disrespect. "Nice toothpick," I said, giving the legendary blade a dismissive little pat. He tried to pull the sword back, but it was stuck tighter than a jar of pickles in a gym. I let go suddenly, and he stumbled back with all the grace of a drunk penguin on an ice rink. The surrounding disciples were staring at me like I'd just rewritten the laws of physics in front of them. He roared in frustration, his purple aura exploding into a massive, swirling vortex of doom. Honestly, the special effects were a solid 10, but the actual damage output was a 0. I walked straight into the eye of the storm, not even bothering to shield my face. The wind was howling, but my hair stayed perfectly in place because I'm just built different. I reached out and tapped him on the forehead, right in the middle of his dramatic monologue. The contact broke his concentration faster than a skip ad button on a 30-minute documentary. The entire vortex collapsed instantly, leaving him standing there looking incredibly awkward and exposed. I didn't even use a skill. I just gave him a light shove that sent him flying into the next zip code. He skipped across the courtyard tiles like a flat stone on a very angry pond. I checked my system notifications and smiled. The disrespect points were rolling in like a jackpot. The sect leader crawled out of the rubble, looking like a wet cat that lost a fight with a lawnmower. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, staining the pristine white marble of the courtyard. "Is that really the best the great sect leader can do?" I asked mockingly. The disciples were trembling, their worldview shattered by a single casual shove. Ding. Disrespect points are surging as the crowd realizes their leader is a fraud. He reached into his robes and pulled out a glowing red pill, the universal sign for "I'm about to lose anyway." "Don't do it, old man," I warned. "That pill won't save your dignity." He ignored me and swallowed the pill, his aura turning a violent, sickly shade of crimson. His eyes turned blood red, which is basically the low battery warning for cultivation villains. He lunged again, but his movements were slow and heavy with the weight of the pill. I stepped to the side, letting his momentum carry him toward the decorative pond. "You missed," I said, watching him struggle to keep his balance on the edge. He roared about the honor of his sect, his voice cracking with desperation. I watched him with bored eyes, waiting for him to finish his dramatic transformation. I decided to end the show and flicked a single pebble toward his forehead. The pebble hit with the force of a freight train, sending him spinning like a glitchy NPC in a Bethesda game. He did a full rotation in the air before crashing back into the dirt. The elders were frozen in place, too terrified to even breathe in my direction. My system interface was flashing gold, tallying up a mountain of new points. I looked around the silent courtyard and asked, "So, who's the next volunteer?" The silence was so awkward it felt like my mom walked in during a plot-heavy anime scene. One elder finally found his voice, though it sounded like a dying squeaky toy. You've destroyed our foundation," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. I just yawned, wondering if these villains ever get tired of reading from the same script. Ding. New achievement unlocked. Sect Wrecker. Reward. 50,000 disrespect points. I started walking toward their main treasury, because why leave empty-handed? A guard blocked my path, looking like he was about to pee his silk pants. "Step aside, kid, before I make you a permanent part of the masonry," I said. He scrambled away faster than a speedrunner skipping a tutorial in a Souls-like game. I kicked the treasury doors open, and the amount of gold was actually offensive. I found their heaven-slaying sword, and used it to scrape gum off my boot like a savage. Ding. Disrespecting a divine artifact? You're a menace. Plus 10,000 points. Suddenly, the sect leader groaned behind me, trying to pull a final form move. He launched a hidden needle at my back, thinking he was being all sneaky-like. I caught it between 2 fingers without even turning around to look at him. "A needle? What's next? Are you going to try and aggressively knit me a sweater?" I flicked the needle back, pinning his sleeve to a pillar and ending his career. I grabbed a bag of high-grade spirit stones and tossed it in the air. Thanks for the loot, losers. Don't forget to leave a 1-star review on Yelp. I hopped onto my flying sword and zoomed off before the property value dropped further. I was cruising through the clouds, feeling like a total boss after that heist. My system notification pinged, probably wanting to congratulate me on being a menace. Ding. New quest. Visit the Jade Pavilion and ruin their annual tea ceremony. A tea ceremony? Seriously? That sounds more boring than watching a 10-hour loop of paint drying in 4K. But hey, if there are points involved, I'm basically the world's best party crasher. I spotted a fancy floating island in the distance, covered in cherry blossoms. It looked so peaceful and serene, which meant it was practically begging for a disaster. I landed right in the middle of the garden, creating a massive dust cloud. The cultivators stared at me with more judgment than a Twitter mob after a celebrity's bad take. One guy, who clearly spent way too much on hair gel, stepped forward. "How dare you interrupt the sacred steeping," he shouted, his face turning red. I looked at his tiny teacup, which was smaller than my chances of getting a girlfriend in high school. "Relax, Sparky. I'm just here to upgrade your boring party to a rager." I reached out and grabbed the legendary, everlasting teapot from the center table. I didn't drink from it. I used the hot tea to wash my face like it was tap water. Ding. Disrespecting me, ancestral brew. You're a legend. Plus 15,000 points. The crowd gasped so hard I thought they were going to vacuum up the atmosphere. The tea saint stood up, looking like he was about to explode from pure rage. He summoned a tea leaf sword, looking like a vegan version of Cloud Strife, who lost his way to the salad bar. I pulled out a packet of instant coffee and held it up like a holy relic. "Behold the true nectar of the gods, you leaf-loving peasants." The tea saint's eyes bulged, probably wondering if I was actually insane or just suicidal. He swung his tea leaf sword, sending a wave of green energy straight for my neck. I sidestepped the attack with the grace of a cat that just discovered catnip. Ding. Dodging with style? That's another 5,000 points in the bank, baby. The sword hit a nearby pillar, slicing through it like a hot knife through butter. "Is that all?" I asked, yawning so wide I could have swallowed a whole dumpling. The crowd started chanting some ancient spell, trying to buff their leader. It was like watching a bunch of low-level NPCs trying to fix a game-breaking glitch in real time. I ripped open the coffee packet and dumped the powder into their sacred teapot. The water turned dark and murky, looking like the sludge at the bottom of a dumpster. The tea saint screamed in agony, as if I'd just deleted his entire 500-hour Minecraft world. "My brew, you've tainted the essence of 1,000 years." I took a long, dramatic sniff of the caffeine-infused chaos brewing in front of me. "Smells like productivity and a looming heart attack," I quipped. The system was basically throwing points at me like a desperate Twitch viewer during a subathon. Suddenly, the ground began to shake, and a giant stone teapot emerged from the earth. Great, a giant teapot boss fight, because this plot wasn't already weird enough for one afternoon. The stone lid popped off, revealing a spirit made of pure, boiling steam. This spirit looked more steamed than my mom when I forget to defrost the chicken for dinner. The steamed spirit roared, blasting a wave of scalding vapor that smelled like a wet sauna and bad decisions. I barely dodged the blast, feeling the heat singe my eyebrows off like a failed science experiment. "Hey, watch the face. This skin routine costs more than your entire sex annual budget." The tea saint was laughing like a generic anime villain who thinks he's finally won the episode. He actually thought his giant kettle ghost was going to end my career right here. I reached into my inventory and pulled out a bag of sugar the size of a beanbag chair. If we're making a drink, we might as well make it sweet enough to kill a horse. I dumped the entire bag into the steamed spirit's mouth before it could even process my disrespect. The spirit froze, its eyes turning into literal swirling candies like a cartoon character having a stroke. Ding. Diabetic shock achieved. You've unlocked the Sugar Rush achievement and 10,000 points. The spirit started vibrating so fast, it looked like a glitchy texture in a Bethesda game. It was beautiful. Then, it exploded into a shower of sticky, sweet syrup that covered everyone in the front row. The tea saint stopped laughing and started sobbing like he just saw his crypto portfolio hit zero. I wiped a drop of syrup off my cheek and gave it a quick taste test. Needs more creamer, but I'll give it a solid 7 out of 10 for effort. The crowd was horrified, staring at me like I'd just kicked a puppy into a black hole. I just stood there, waiting for the system to finish tallying up my glorious, disrespectful loot. The ground shook again, but this time it was the sex treasury opening up like a giant loot box. Apparently, beating the teapot meant I was now the legal owner of this entire tea-obsessed dump. I walked toward the gold, ready to spend it all on new and creative ways to ruin people's lives. I stepped into the treasury, and the gold was so bright it blinded me instantly. There were piles of spirit stones stacked higher than the ego of a typical cultivation protagonist. I started shoveling everything into my inventory as fast as my hands could move. I asked the system to calculate the total value of this massive haul. Ding. Total value exceeds 5 million points. You are now officially filthy rich. I felt a sudden chill, sensing a powerful presence approaching from the shadows. A door at the back of the room burst open, revealing a guy with a beard longer than a CVS receipt. It was the Great Elder, and he looked absolutely furious that I was touching his gold. He screamed at me for robbing the vault, his voice cracking with rage. I just stood there, casually tossing a gold coin up and down. I told him I was just doing some aggressive wealth redistribution, old man. He pulled out a sword that looked way too heavy for his brittle bones. The air pressure in the room dropped, making my ears pop like I was landing in a budget airline. He was charging up a move that radiated an immense amount of spiritual pressure. I checked my system shop for something that would really ruin his day. I found the perfect item, the banana peel of eternal humiliation. It cost 50,000 points, but seeing his face hit the floor would be worth it. The great elder lunged forward, his sword glowing with a blinding light. I dropped the peel right in his path, timing it better than a parry in a Dark Souls boss fight. He didn't even see it coming, his majestic charge about to turn into a total disaster. The great elder's foot slipped, and he went airborne like a majestic, bearded eagle. His ultimate sword move got cancelled mid-animation, turning him into a perfect, pathetic parabola. He slammed into the treasury wall with a thud louder than a Discord mod hitting the floor. Gold coins rained down on his face, giving him a funeral service that was way more expensive than he deserved. Ding. Congratulations on achieving maximum disrespect. You've earned 100,000 troll points. I looked at the great elder buried in the loot, and honestly, I couldn't stop myself from wheezing. I told him his faceplant technique was top tier and had some serious artistic flair. The old man started shaking so hard I thought he was glitching. Then he coughed up a literal gallon of blood. He pointed a trembling finger at me, but his brain was clearly still processing the banana peel. I didn't have time for his midlife crisis, so I got back to the important business of looting. I headed deeper into the vault toward a box glowing with a suspicious purple light. The system told me this was the sect's ultimate treasure, probably some legendary artifact or a very shiny paperweight. Just as I reached out, a lightning barrier surged up around the box like a high-voltage keep-out sign. The crackling sound was so loud it made my hair stand up like I'd just rubbed a balloon on my head. Great, the ancient cultivation sect actually invested in a high-tech home security system from the year 3000. Behind me, the great elder started cackling like a Disney villain, claiming I'd never break the seal. He bragged that only the sect leaders knew the secret password to open this thing. I just rolled my eyes and bought a pair of ultimate insulated gloves from the system shop. For the low price of 9.99, these bad boys make lightning look like a minor static shock from a fuzzy carpet. I pulled on the gloves and reached for the box while the old man watched in absolute horror. I grabbed the purple box, and the lightning barrier sizzled against my gloves like a cheap steak. The great elder's jaw dropped, so low I'm surprised it didn't shatter on the floor. He started screaming about how this was impossible, sounding like a Karen who just got told the manager is busy. I ignored his mental breakdown and ripped the lid off the box with zero effort. Inside sat a single, glowing jade slip that looked way too fancy for its own good. Ding, you've discovered the heaven-defying slap technique. Learning this will make you the ultimate menace. A skill dedicated entirely to slapping people? This system really knows my brand. I slapped the jade slip against my forehead, and the knowledge flooded my brain like a 5G download. Suddenly, my right hand started glowing with a golden light that screamed, main character energy. The great elder finally stood up, looking like a wet cat that just survived a blender and a tax audit. He pulled out a forbidden pill, clearly hoping for a last-minute power-up like a generic shonen protagonist on a budget. His aura exploded, turning the room into a chaotic mess of flying dust and expensive debris. He yelled that he would sacrifice his soul just to take me down with him. I just yawned and checked my watch, wondering if he was done with his dramatic monologue yet. He charged at me, his fist glowing with enough power to level a small mountain. I didn't even dodge. I just wound up my arm for the debut of my new technique. My hand connected with his cheek with a sound that echoed through the entire mountain range. He didn't just fly back. He spun like a Beyblade before crashing through 3 different walls. Ding. Maximum disrespect achieved. The great elder's dignity has officially left the chat and blocked your number. I stood over the hole in the wall, feeling like the king of trolls in this cliché-filled world. I looked down at the great elder, who was twitching like a bug that just met a high-speed windshield. Ding. You've earned 5,000 disrespect points. Your slap was so disrespectful, it actually lowered his IQ. I checked my status screen and saw my menace level was finally hitting the triple digits. Suddenly, the ground started shaking, because of course the final boss always has a mandatory phase 2. A massive stone door at the back of the hall creaked open, revealing a dark, ominous energy. Out stepped the sect leader, looking like he spent way too much money on hair gel and dark eyeliner. He demanded to know who dared to disturb his meditation and ruin his expensive masonry. I just pointed at the elder in the wall and told him his interior decorator did a terrible job. The sect leader's eyes turned red, and he unleashed a pressure that would make a normal person faint. To me, it felt like a light breeze on a summer day, barely enough to mess up my hair. He summoned a massive spectral sword that looked like it belonged in a budget Final Fantasy remake. You will pay for your arrogance with your life, he roared, sounding like a generic villain AI. I pulled out a bag of sunflower seeds and started snacking while he finished his power-up animation. The audience of disciples was whispering, probably wondering why I wasn't dead yet. Ding. New quest. Defeat the sect leader using only your left pinky for maximum emotional damage. A pinky-only fight? This system is officially more unhinged than a Twitter argument at 3 a.m. I tucked my other 9 fingers into my pockets and gave him a beckoning motion with my smallest digit. The sect leader looked like he was about to have a stroke from sheer, unadulterated rage. He swung the giant sword down, aiming to split me like a piece of dry firewood. I raised my pinky to meet the blade, ready to break the laws of physics and his spirit simultaneously. The moment the blade touched my pinky, the sound of metal screaming filled the entire hall. The spectral sword shattered into a million pieces, looking more fragile than a celebrity's reputation after a leaked DM. The shockwave sent the sect leader stumbling back, his cool guy eyeliner smearing from the sheer force. Ding, you've shattered his pride and his weapon. 8,000 disrespect points awarded for being a literal god-tier troll. I blew on my pinky like it was a smoking gun and asked if that was his best or just a warm-up. His jaw dropped, so low I'm pretty sure he was trying to swallow the floor tiles like a hungry hippo. Impossible, he shrieked, which is basically the catchphrase for every villain about to get bodied. The disciples in the back were frantically checking their manuals to see if pinky style was a real thing. He started glowing a sickly purple, preparing a forbidden technique that definitely cost him a few years of life. A giant purple dragon emerged from his back, looking like a low-budget CGI monster from a 2005 sci-fi original movie. I stood there, wondering if I had time to finish my sunflower seeds before this lizard finished its monologue. The dragon roared, but it sounded more like a vacuum cleaner struggling with a thick rug. With a flick of my wrist, I sent a shockwave from my pinky that popped the dragon like a balloon. The sect leader hit the far wall, creating a crater that was honestly the most impressive thing he'd done all day. Ding. Quest complete. Reward. The Finger of Fate, title, and a permanent plus 50 to your smugness stat. I walked over to his unconscious body and started looting his pockets, because a hero's gotta get paid. Just as I found a shiny jade pendant, a cold voice echoed from the ceiling, sounding way too serious. A woman in white descended, looking like she was auditioning for a shampoo commercial with all that unnecessary slow-motion hair flipping. She told me I had crossed a line, but honestly, I didn't even see a line to begin with. I just waved my pinky at her and asked if she wanted to be the next one to test my manicure. She looked at me with eyes colder than my ex's heart on a snowy Tuesday. I am the Grand Elder of the Jade Frost sect, she announced, striking a pose. I let out a long, exaggerated yawn that echoed through the silent hall. She drew a rapier that glittered like a disco ball at a 70s-themed funeral. Ding. New challenge. Defeat the Ice Queen without messing up your hair. Reward, 10,000 points. I adjusted my collar and told her she was way too pretty to be annoying. Her face turned a deep shade of red from pure, unadulterated rage. She lunged forward, her speed making her look like a glitchy character in a laggy MMO. I sidestepped her strike with effortless grace, barely even moving my feet. Is that all? I asked, leaning against a pillar that was somehow still standing. She unleashed a blizzard technique, turning the hall into a giant walk-in freezer. My system warned me about frostbite, but I ignored it because I'm built different. I snapped my fingers, and a wave of heat melted her ice instantly. Thick steam filled the room, obscuring everything but my glowing eyes. She gasped, her composure finally breaking as she realized her power was useless. I stepped through the mist, my grin promising her a very bad day. You're out of your league, lady, I whispered, right next to her ear. She tried to swing again, but I caught her wrist with 2 fingers. Ding. Disrespect level, critical. You've officially made a Grand Elder question her life choices. I looked at the camera, the sky, and wondered who was going to pay for the floor. She stumbled back in terror as her rapier clattered uselessly onto the floor. What kind of monster are you? She stammered, her voice shaking with dread. I casually brushed the dust off my robes and flashed her a harmless, innocent smile. Ding. Reward received. My system points just hit a higher peak than my blood pressure during a boss fight. Right on cue, the sound of heavy, hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway outside.